Hello and good tidings. Welcome back to Mind the Force, a nerdy podcast about Star Wars and mental health. I'm your host, Kristine McPartlin, and I find myself equal parts sad and ecstatically relieved to welcome you, our listeners, to our first non Anakin Skywalker episode. I absolutely adored covering Anakin in the depth that we did. Big shout out and love to all my brilliant psych professionals and to my Jedi Master of a co host, Matt. I know you are listening, Matt, for making the inaugural run of Mind the Force a true delight. This is also the first one off character episode. So, our typical ball game at Mind the Force will be a character covered in a single episode with both character analysis and condition assessment interview. Honestly, our coverage of Anakin went on as long as it did because of the density of his character and my lack of desire to cut out any of the prime conversation that occurred around him. Because here at Mind the Force, we do what I want to do. And it turns out I wanted to talk about Anakin Skywalker for 11 hours. And don't lie to yourself, you loved it. Mm hmm. Mm hmm. But I know you're sitting there thinking to yourselves, when is she going to shut up about toasty old Annie and get to the guy we're here to talk about today? The fastest gun in the galaxy. The big, bad, red eyed, don't need no Visine, hat wearing man himself, Cad Bane. Yes, we are going to have a lot of fun today, guys. I'm very excited to welcome James Abbate as my trusty nerdy co pilot. You are just going to love him. Trust me on this. And my mental health pro, Mr. Simone Rinne, social worker and host of the Mindful Men podcast, joins me all the way from Australia. We've gone international. It's all happening, people. It's all happening. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. But before we take off casually in a cruiser car after holding up some senators hostage, our usual order of business. To follow this journey with me, please check out the sensational mindtheforce.com for pod and guest info, and follow Mind the Force on Instagram and Facebook. And to stay up to date on the latest episodes, please follow, subscribe, and share on all your favorite streaming platforms. You have Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the others. Follow the link tree, you'll find it. Some advice: don't be lame. Shoot us 5 stars on your preferred platform. You know you want to. And for all the big Star Wars thoughts, questions, and feelings, send me an email at mindtheforestpodcast@gmail.com. And last, but certainly never least, your friendly content spoiler warning. Mind the Force podcast is a retrospective on Star Wars characters across all Star Wars content. All films, TV shows, novels, comic books, and video games are up for discussion. If you don't want some currently released Star Wars content to be spoiled, you know the drill. I'd turn around now. Mm. Now, at last, we are ready to take off with our special rocket boots and see where the night takes us. Off we go. Good morning, James. How are you?
Good morning, Kristine. Quite well. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm so excited to have you on. We have been talking about this for some time. It's been a couple of months that we've gone back and forth on having you on. And I'm really excited to have you on for Cad Bane today. I think we're going to have a great time.
I agree. I'm thrilled to be here. Not only this is my first Star Wars podcast, this is my first podcast ever, so I really appreciate this opportunity. And yeah, let's go to a galaxy far, far away.
Hell yeah. That's what I like to hear. I'm very excited to have James on. James has been a friend of mine for, oh gosh, how many years has it been?
Decades at this point,
Right?
since
It
the
well
mid 2000s.
well over a decade. I mean, we can totally count your friendship with my brother. That absolutely counts because I'm sure I was the little sister somewhere in the back.
Yeah, and crept your way forward, and as I'm
Right?
sure I crept forward too.
Exactly, right? We crept our way forward in the friendship block. And yeah, no, everyone should know that when I developed Mind the Force and I was thinking about who I wanted to have on, James, I think you were my second call when I was thinking about who do I know who is like with the Star Wars obsession. I was like, I'm gonna hit up James Abbate and see what's good.
I remember that in its incipient stages, and yeah, my fandom just speaks loudly for itself because I just have memorabilia everywhere. I am not shy or ashamed of it. I just broadcast it whenever guests are over. Kristine's brother Joey, it's his birthday. He's here right now. Actually, he's out for a breakfast, but he's actually staying for the weekend with his girlfriend, and they see Star Wars everywhere, and it's quite exciting.
Yes, yes, happy birthday to Joey.
Happy birthday,
Sure.
Joey.
And and for context, James lives in Vegas. He's one of those cool Vegas guys. And so they're gonna go out and have a good time and celebrate in my brother's honor. So I hope you guys have a great time with that.
Many thanks. And yeah.
All right, but in the meantime, we have some meat to flesh out about one terrifying bounty hunter by the name of Cad Bane. So, to kind of get started, Cad Bane, as all of you Star Wars heads will note, is a bounty hunter. You know, he's got the blue face and the big red eyes and that big ass hat. And when he shows up, you know that he's running the situation.
It's trouble. Hmm.
It's trouble has arrived. That is for sure. And you'll know him from well, we're gonna get through all of his different appearances and kind of the thought process behind his image and maybe what he was feeling. Um, but we see him obviously premiere in Clone Wars, the animated series, but he pops up in a myriad of Star Wars content. Several of the shows he shows up in Bad Batch, and then he shows up again in Book of Boba Fett, where we see him for his live action debut.
Hmm.
And but he's in several of the novels. He has several appearances across comic books over the years. And I mean, I think that's the fun part about the bounty hunters really across the galaxy is that they just pop up like these little like one-off adventure stories that I think everybody enjoys.
And they fit into any time, any place, really, because of the nature of their work, and they're generally very, solo and nimble. So, it's a very great plot device in that sense because you have unexpected crossovers when you watch the Book of Boba Fett, for instance. I thought that was one of the highlights. This is years later, and here he is, still eking out a living and being a very formidable threat.
Right? Um and I think that it's very interesting because a lot of the discussion that we had in prep for this was just about that image, that like quintessential Western badass bounty hunter image that he cultivates for himself. Um, and I think it's important to start at the beginning of why he cultivated that image for himself as the character. So Cad Bane was born on the planet Duros in 62 BBY, which is exactly 30 years before Order 66 in 32 BBY. Just to give a context of kind of Cad Bane's age over the course of kind of the main part of the Star Wars storyline. And Duros was almost a little bit like Coruscant in that they had their upper societal class living on the surface and living very well, but then they had their impoverished class lived in these what do we want to call them? Like crevasses, pits.
Yeah, I guess sort
Yeah,
pits,
like
trenches. Yeah.
yeah, trenches like they have on Coruscant, where yeah, people basically live in a hole in the ground, like a large hole in the ground. And so he was living down there in the dregs, in the slums, and he saw bounty hunting as a way to rise up in society, as a way to gain respect and to make money, which is really, if I had to pick two things that Cad Bane was just all about, it's respect and money.
Hmm. Right, and because there's no honor among thieves, in a sense, we can get to that later. But ultimately, it was his brand, his reputation was his life, in his livelihood, his whole galaxy, and without that, he had nothing. So that was the bottom line in every interaction that he had.
Yeah. And and just over time as he worked on Duros and improved his skills as a bounty hunter, he realized that his image was just as important as the skills he was bringing to the table. Like it was just as quintessential to the level of respect and also the quality of the jobs that he was going to get. So he put together this image of himself that he felt would elicit the amount of respect that he felt he needed. So I mean, what we as the viewer see is this classic Western trope. It's the bounty hunter, it's the gunslinger, it's the villain with the big dark hat and the piercing eyes and the chiseled jaw. I thought was really interesting just getting to know the character more, especially the character development, is where the image came from. So Cad Bane is directly based off characters played by Lee Van Cleef in the 60s, in old school Western films, almost always starring Clint Eastwood as the good guy. Van Cleef would play the bad guy. And so in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966, he played Angel Eyes. And that is, if you Google Angel Eyes in that film, that's Cad Bane. Like down to like the facial structure, the big hat. Like if you watch clips, you'll see just the not giving a fuck attitude, very job focused. I'm like, oh, that's a very one to one comparison.
Hmm.
and and it's just interesting. It's interesting how it's so identifiable, like the gunslinger, the outlaw, the fastest gun in the West. Like it's like that's who Cat is, but it's so cool that that trope can then not only be inserted into like these old school Western movies that are meant to be set in the past, but works just as well in space.
It's beautiful to see that translation because Star Wars originally was kind of George Lucas's passion project of like Flash Gordon and the old pulps, that American I guess cinema, whether it's TV or comic books. It was just a certain uh, brand of Western culture meets Eastern culture, obviously with the religious aspects and the spirituality and the Jedi and whatnot. But slowly it absorbed all of that. But the foundation was kind of, you know, the pulps, the westerns, and Han Solo and the Farmer Boy, all that stuff was baked into the cake in Episode 4. And Dave Filoni, what he did was he kind of went back to formula with that. As complex as Clone Wars was, he introduced characters like Cad Bane, and they really echoed that initial trope, which was pretty cool because you just remember, oh yeah, okay, we can have the West out in in wild space. It's pretty cool.
Right, right. We still have right. We can still duel, and we can still have blasters and all that. And I think what it is, like you said, harkening back to the original trilogy, there was that very clear good versus evil. It was like Luke and his like bright eyes and blonde hair, like all this brightness of good, face off against Darth Vader and all this black and all this dark. Like it was very clear good
Hmm.
guy, bad guy. And that's really how it was even in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, even from their wardrobe. You had Clint Eastwood and his light colored hat and his like blonde hair and light colored eyes. Like I think he was literally called Blondie. It's like the name of his character. And then
Hmm.
you had Angel Eyes, like with these piercing eyes and this dark hat and like dark clothing. And it was what I read that was interesting was that they did that purposefully because westerns started back in the black and white era before like movies were in color. Um and it was a very easy way for the audience to understand who was who. Like they couldn't have both the bad guy and the good guy in a dark hat in black and white because they wouldn't be able to tell who's who.
That's a very interesting point because yes, back in the day, the villain would always be in all black, and I'm like, isn't this really hot in the desert for you right now?
Right?
But it
Right.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, it's really just for cinematic clarity. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. And just kind of I mean, I'd be interested to know how far back that trope goes, like light versus dark, good versus evil. Because
You can
yeah,
even
is
look
it
at in
a
the yin and yang symbol.
ooh, yes. Ooh,
The Taoism.
okay. Look,
It goes
making the
pretty far.
religious connections. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's very interesting in that regard, and you can say it applies to many aspects of life. That imagery, and it's definitely in Cad Bane's wardrobe and appearance, and they definitely were pulling no punches when they were trying to establish him as just a baddie. Yes, he's layered, but I would say he's a villain in my opinion, at least. I don't consider him an anti-hero as much as you
Yeah,
would with
definitely
someone like
not.
Boba Fett. He's always been an antagonist in nearly every situation. He helped the rise of the Sith. There hasn't, to me, I don't think he has a net positive on the universe from a moralistic standpoint. If you look at it from, I guess a story, narrative based, he contributes a lot.
Right? Like yeah, no, his skill, like he is woven right into the bigger story on so many levels. Cause yeah, he's the one who's getting hired by basically like the Sith lords and the people really controlling the narrative in the background for these jobs that they know he can execute. And it's like, oh, this guy will
Hmm.
deliver. If we pay him enough money, he doesn't give a fuck what we ask him to do. Like he'll kidnap children. He will he will do pretty much anything you ask him to do if you pay him enough.
Yes.
And what it really is it's that like we'll talk a lot about like his competitiveness and that need to be the best as we go through his story, but what he really is at the end of the day is a survivor. He is like, I'm ready to survive by any means necessary. I got myself out of the slums. I built myself up to what I have today by the grit of my teeth and by my own skill, and nobody handed me anything. And I'm gonna do what I need to do for myself. Fuck everybody else.
Yeah, and
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 there's a
and
level of
yeah.
respect that comes with that.
Of course, when you look at it that way, you also have to consider his circumstances in the sense that he kind of came about at the end of a corrupt republic where everything was just chaos and there was no control, and it allowed for the whole Clone Wars, the Confederacy of independent systems to happen, a civil war. Of course, it's kind of reflective of that in not just America but really anywhere. Star Wars is just history writ large. Just
Yeah,
takes everything, dials it up to 11. But you really do see like his if you measure his goals, he survived. He made it to the New Republic era. From one republic to an empire to another. That's a difficult feat, especially being in his line of fire all the time. You know, he knew how to dodge bullets. He knew how to survive.
absolutely. And I find that it's very common that you see like these little pockets of like rises in I don't even really want to say crime because he's a like we know the criminal things he's done, but a bounty hunter doesn't necessarily have to be a criminal. Um But like you said, he survived through all these different governments. And it makes me think about some of the interactions, like even in Clone Wars, going around to all the different planets, whether they're separatist planets or with the Republic or neutral. And these kind of smaller people, these villages would tell whether it's Obi-Wan or Anakin or Ahsoka, be like, we don't really care who's in charge. Like whether it's the Republic or it's the Empire or it's
Hmm.
whoever, like, they don't really care about us, like, it doesn't make a difference to us, and I feel like CAD definitely falls into that category of, like, I'm here for me, like, if you guys wanna fight about whatever or do whatever, that's all fine as long as I can work and make a livelihood for myself, and that's my bottom line.
Absolutely, yes. He's just I mean, he we can get into it later, but he always puts himself first, except when he saved Kenobi's life. There when they say there's no honor among thieves, I thought that was ultimately,
Ooh,
looking out for himself, he's like, we got to have a code here, and you got to be a man about it, is what he ultimately said when
right.
he saves him. And ultimately, I think that ties down to looking out for his own back. He's like, I don't want this to happen to me. I need to set an example here. That's all it was. There was no emotion in his heart, in my opinion. I don't think he gets attached to people, considering his line of work.
No. No, definitely not, and who knows, maybe one day we'll get more, like, early Cad Bane, and maybe he got burned by something like that. Maybe he was like, "Nope, I
Hmm.
had an attachment once, and it absolutely failed or blew up in my face, never gonna do that again." And it could all be one giant trauma reaction, who knows?
Right. For all we know, he's an abuse victim, and because there's a lot of unexplored stuff, and we could say, wow, the fact that he made it out semi-functional, is a testament. Because again, we need to see the full story. No one really knows but him.
Right?
So I'm interested to see how the
Right?
team, hopefully Filoni, will flush that out.
Filoni is the king of character development, in my opinion, so I'm sure he will not leave us wanting.
Oh, for sure.
But so what we the very little we do know about Cad Bane's early life is, like I said, born in 62 BBY, grew up very poor. And what we do know is that he had a professional relationship with the bounty hunter Django Fett, who, of course, everyone knows is the best bounty hunter in the galaxy and was the biological template that the Kaminoans used to build the clone army. Um, Shout out to the clones. And what's the actor's name? Temaru Morrison?
Tomorrow, Marson, yeah.
Yes, yes. Shout out, man. You're the one. You're the one. Literally the
Many, many,
singular one.
many many acting roles. That clone plot device allows him to get a lot of paychecks, and that's a good thing. I like seeing him
Facts.
even in Obi-Wan when he's the discarded vet, and that was even speaking
Right?
to veterans. We see that in New York City and out here. I thought that was a very, very strong point. Just a little aside.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's so much. Oh my god. There's definitely gonna be episodes where I cover not only like clones individually, but like military focused episodes, and there's so much done back there. As usual, Star Wars
Beautiful.
like hits the nail on the head of realistic real life commentary. Um, but so he trains under Django Fett, and that's when he learns a lot from Django. Like he even will speak later about how, I owe Django a few favors. Like there was history there. But I think he also knew because Django was referred to as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, and as
Hmm.
Cad Bane rose in the ranks, like he knew he would never be able to beat Django, and kind of everyone else knew that too. And from what I've read, that really that bothered Cad. That bothered him that he's like, "Oh, like, I'll never defeat Django. Like, how am I gonna do this? Like, as much as I improve, like he'll always be better." And then he went and died. Got his head cut off by a certain Jedi, Mace Windu, which spawned a whole bunch of interesting events that we'll discuss. But yeah, but that left Bane actually very unsatisfied. Like he wanted to be the one to kill Django. And yes, now people knew him to be the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, but he never felt like he earned that. Like he never felt
Yes.
oh, I defeated the best, so now I am the best. It's like, "Oh, I got that by default." It's like the other team not showing up for the game and you win by default. Like there's a lack of satisfaction to it. And that bugged him.
In a sense, it's kind of a phantom limb. It's always there, and yet it's not there. It's very much. You can even look at like Goku and Vegeta's rivalry from Dragon Ball Z. Of course, Vegeta's whole purpose for living is to defeat the number one because he's the number two.
Yeah.
And you can see that here. Cad Bane never really got that opportunity. He just inherited the mantle, and to him, he's like, I don't want just this random inheritance. I want it to be the one, and I need to really flex my muscles now. The whole galaxy needs to see. I don't have the descriptor. Killer of Django Fett that goes to Mace Windu. He's like, now I really need to prove my stuff to really make a mark on this galaxy and improve my brand and my rep to the level that I want to be. I want to be king. I want to be emperor in this sphere of the galaxy.
Exactly. Like you want the crown, you don't want the consolation prize. Like that, like to him that especially in his like his idea of what being a man is, what being the best is, like that really hyper competitive masculinity, um, you can't just have things handed to you. He never had anything handed to him, and that title got handed to him, and that did not sit well with
Mhm.
him. Like, he didn't earn it. And it's very interesting how that mentality comes into play in his relationship later with Boba Fett, because I mean, I find everything about Boba Fett fascinating.
Same. I'm
Can't
there with you.
wait to cover him, particularly just in Clone Wars with the child bounty hunter and him just like, he took out a starship trying to kill Mace Windu. I
He
think
he
that's
had it.
insane. Like, wasn't he like 12 when he did that?
Yeah, well, yeah, he's a triple threat. He's a born natural. His dad raised him.
Right?
He's kind of just very much a prodigy. And I guess you can argue the genetics over that, just considering he is a replica of his father, who was in the same business, but his father didn't have those genes. He learned it. So therefore, I think it's more nurture than nature in that case. He was just trained by the best, and I think that ultimately showed even though Jango Fett died. Ultimately you see their character arcs, and the Boba versus Cad Bane rivalry. In the end, the Fett, way of handling things
Like,
was
wins
superior
out.
to the Bane. Yeah,
Yeah.
in one manner of speaking.
Right? In one manner of speaking. Um, and but he interacts with Boba more later. Boba, like,
Hmm.
has all of his own shit going on. So the next time we really see Cad Bane is, I guess, chronologically, is
Hmm.
in a 2017 Darth Maul comic book series, which I find really interesting because, I mean, Maul is my man, as you all know.
Hmm.
I bang hard for the Maul Hive. I have my little bobblehead right here, as I always do. And so Darth Maul, who at this point is still kind of living in the shadows, like doing Palpatine's quote unquote apprentice work, even though he's not really his apprentice, um, hires Cad Bane and several other well-known bounty hunters for a job to kidnap a Jedi Padawan who has basically been kidnapped and is being sold on the auction block. So they know they're probably not going to be able to get Jedi the Jedi Padawan at auction. They're just going to be outbid by other slavers, and so they're like, okay, we're just going to kidnap this kid afterwards from whoever like wins the bid, and we'll just do what we want. And of course, the other bounty hunters are very suspicious of Maul because they're like, this guy doesn't need us. Like, he's clearly more powerful than us. Like, what are we, patsies? Like, what are we doing here for? And Kat is like, keep that suspicion at the front of your mind, but like, let's also get paid. Like, let's see how this
Yes.
plays out. Like, he's along for the ride, but he doesn't trust anyone. He's always wary, always like on alert, but he'll follow through with the job if he's going to get paid. He's like, let's find. He's almost like curiosity killed the cat. Like, yeah, let's find out. If I get paid at the end, that's great. Like,
Yeah, not much workers' comp in his field, but he is a freelancer. He's a professional, and he's just hired for his success rate. It's pretty much 100, so he's earned that in that professional stance.
oh, absolutely. And even at one point, so they kidnap this Padawan, and what happens is then I'm looking for the name of the group that basically comes after them. Realize like, "Oh no, you took this Padawan that we just bought. We're going to come after you guys and like make it a problem." And so then they get separated. The mall's like, "Okay, I'm going to go this way, find the Padawan. You guys go that way." And it basically the plan kind of blows up in their face. Like, the Padawan is able to escape and go back to the Jedi Order, and Bane thinks that he's actually kind of like in a corner, that he may not make it out. Like, he's kind of being overpowered by the other people that are chasing them. And then suddenly Cad Bane shows up with the ship. Like, the bounty hunters come back for Maul, and they show that Maul is actually very surprised by this, and it just shows Cad's professionalism. That he's like, "Nope, we haven't finished the job yet. Like, you're still my client." You're still my client. I may not trust you. This may have blown up in our faces, and it may not be great, but we're still gonna make it through. You're still my client. I will come back for you."
Yes, and I'm sorry, I was looking it up too. Eldra Kaitis. That was the Padawan?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
There yes, and the ship that they were trying to get away on crashed. Like, it was sabotaged, and they were forced to crash land on a moon, and then everyone survives the crash, but then they have to split in order to, like, try to, like, send the people coming them off their tails. The Trandosians. Oh gosh, there's so many this happens all the time, the amount of alien races that you have to remember.
Yes, and it's like, "Oh, of course I know," but I always mix them up too. I was like, "Oh, wait a
Right.
sec."
Right, like, I know, like oh my god, like, in one of the episodes, I think the last Anakin character analysis, me and Matt kicked ourselves because we could remember the Catonemoidians, but we could not remember the Kaminoans, and we're like, "What is the name? What's the name of the race that made the clones? They're very important. Why can't we remember it?" And yes, I just had that same brain fart with the Trandosians, who are the same race that kidnap
Bosk.
Ahsoka and those other Padawans. So they're big on the Jedi Padawan kidnapping. It's really their thing. Just these big lizards that want to hunt children. That's nice.
They have
And
they have interest. They apparently eat their siblings. I was reading in one of the bounty hunter comics, Bosk. They were
ah,
mentioning that, so they have a very hard upbringing. So,
right, a
it's like
little
the
rough.
best kind of breaks out and lives. Yeah, the rest just
Just a
get
little rough.
eaten.
I mean,
Yeah,
never forget, James. Hurt people hurt people. So if
yeah.
they're
Hurt people.
sitting
Hurt people.
around if their upbringing was, "Okay, you had a sibling, one of you's gonna get eaten." That's a rough way to
Yeah,
start.
but it
So
shows their rough outlook later in life too, especially
right,
in
right,
this
it
context.
really it right, it gives a lot of context to what the Transoceans do with their free time. So yeah, so Maul's in a corner, cornered by the Trandosians, and Bane comes back for him to his absolute surprise, and Bane's all about getting paid. He's like, "I'm gonna go back for you. You have the money. I'm not gonna leave you behind."
Yeah,
Um,
like duh.
yeah, and I think it's a great example of Bane's professionalism. Always skeptical, but always professional.
Yes. And it makes you wonder outside in his personal life, if he dates or whatnot. Like, is he more of a gentleman or is he just totally, isolated, a loner?
Right?
Um, we don't
Right?
really
Because
see much of that. Is he capable of love? Stuff like that.
right? Like, or like, does he go into like the space saloons? Like, does he be talking to the bitches? Like, I don't
Right? Is
know.
he a
Like,
gentleman? Like, or is he a player?
right?
Like, what kind of? I do want to see that
Right?
because that is an important aspect of his psyche as well.
Right?
And
I
that's
mean,
something we're completely off without.
maybe he's more of a prostitute guy. Like his like
He
very
strikes me as that.
easy transaction. I'm gonna pay you for
Yes.
a service because haven't gotten my jollies off in a while. It brings a
No
whole new
emotional
definition
connection.
to blue balls.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
for sure. He's like, "I already got him." But that's interesting because and watch Filoni throw a fastball, and it's like, nope, actually, he takes care of his sister. She has a terminal disease. I would love to see
Right?
more dimensions to him
Something.
that show that because you only have to work off the page of what you have at the point that we know he's a villain, but he could be, for all we know, the chosen one if there's other
Right?
elements of his story that we have not seen.
Right, exactly. Like there's like everything's like everyone's two-dimensional until they're not. Until we just find
Exactly.
out more of this life that he has lived and also the things that he has seen. Like who knows if he especially dealing with the fact that like he doesn't mind going up against Jedi. Like he doesn't mind taking on the hardest assignments. Who knows what Bane has seen and the places that he's been. Maybe he's been to the world between worlds. Who knows?
Right.
Yeah, like I wonder if he like does I wonder if like he understands the Force at all or feels the Force, or if he's kind of like a Thrawn and is just like, "Nope, don't get it, don't feel it." I don't take him as the religious type.
Hmm.
So,
Well,
is he just on his ones and zeros and that's it? Like,
that's
maybe.
an interesting point. He holds his own against the Jedi, like Quinlan Vos and stuff. After Zero, is that happens, but he ultimately you could just argue, okay, he's a master tactician, knows how to fight, he's been around Jedi before, he knows their weaknesses, their strengths, and when to get out, when to fold them. It's basically like Kenny Rogers song. But it's amazing because someone like him or a Fett, the bounty hunters, they have the best fights against force wielders just because again they've seen it all. They've seen everything in the galaxy. They're like a walking encyclopedia, and they know their odds as well because Bane makes a retreating move there, and I think that's it's just interesting to see them even risk their own lives when the odds are so heavily stacked against them. They don't have the force, unless maybe he dabbled, like you said. Maybe there was one point where he just learned it on a very surface level, enough to help him with some leaps here and there.
Maybe. Something I'll send you after this is a great video compilation of Cad Bane's life, and shout out to
Hmm.
all the fantastic YouTubers that make these storyline compilations. I will shout you guys out in the episode description because yeah, you can do all the reading you want, you can look at all the comics, but sometimes you really just need a big bulk of information, and these videos are fantastic for that. Um,
Great, great.
and something I learned about Cad Bane that was really cool was aside from his like the image that he presents with like the hat and the duster and the pistols ready at the hip, um, he basically is outfitted like a Mandalorian as far as his armor and his outfit. Like everything he wears has a purpose.
Hmm.
Like the fabric of the coat is blaster proof, and he has his instead of wearing a jetpack, he has rocket shoes, and the, like, armor he wears underneath, even the hoses that are attached to his face are, essentially able to help him what is it? They're over his, like, breathing holes, like, the front of his face isn't where his nose is. Like, he has they're almost kinda gills, but, like, they're on the side of his face, and those
Hmm.
hoses cover it, and essentially he can survive like toxic gas. I think it can help him heal faster. I think whatever kind of system it has going on. um his original hat is also part of his is like kind of helmety. It's not quite like none of it's made of Beskar, obviously, so it's not entirely
Hmm.
like a Mandalorian suit of armor, but it's quite impressive that he's like the description was everything he wears has a purpose. And it's all part of like the armor that helps him, like whether it's gadgets he wears on his arms or up his sleeve or things he has like in his coat. And it's very fascinating. I was like, I never thought that hard about what he was wearing beyond what it looked like. But everything is functional. Like, and which I'm sure he learned from Django that he's like, "Oh, what are the benefits of you wearing this armor? Like, how do I get those same benefits?"
Yeah, and a lot of that I think was forgive me being crass, but kind of penis envy in a sense, and even
No,
though
we
he
we give we give very little fucks here on Mind the Force, James. You can
okay,
say
fantastic.
whatever you need to say.
And I'm not saying he doesn't have one because I don't know. I've never seen that in there for him. But metaphorically speaking, he wanted to be Django. He envied him, and his life is kind of a pale replica in a sense. Yet in
Yeah,
many ways, he's more from what we've seen. We've seen more successful missions. We don't see much of Django. Django dies in episode 2.
right.
We see Cad Bane fleshed out across multiple series, even though they never really hit the big screen like that. For the most part, he's the bounty hunter we spent more time with. Yet Django looms so largely, mostly because of the Fett, persona and the Boba Fett franchise and all that. But from what we've seen, even in the original trilogy, Boba Fett really didn't pull that much off except taking hand to Jabba. But as we know, in the expanded media, he's the best of the best, the cream of the crop, and that's the same with Cad Bane here. So the question is, did he reach the top? Did he reach his goals, or was he ultimately sandwiched in between the Fets? And did he become just a footnote in history, or was he looming larger than we give him credit for?
Right, right. Like, where does he fall? I mean, I certainly think he's imprinted his own place in history, but I definitely think there's that force ghost of the Fets that he can't really escape. Um, and it's interesting too because I think about what I'd love to learn more about is like the time he spent with Django. Because even think about when Django meets Obi-Wan. on Kaminoa, like, he is not intimidated by a Jedi. Like, he's like, I'm not here to be, like, pressed by you," like, whether it's like, and then they have the whole chase in space, and he's, like, more than ready to kill him, and I wonder, and especially it's, I mean, you have, like, the Jedi versus the Mandalorians, and then you have, like, bounty hunters who are equipped to deal with Jedi, which
Mhm.
Bane very much is. Like, he'll go face to face with the Jedi. Like, later on, he doesn't give Rocco Hardeen, which we'll get into that storyline,
Mhm.
he doesn't give him any credit for sniper killing a Jedi. He's like, "Any fool can kill a Jedi with a sniper rifle. Like, you want my respect, you do it face to face." So he's like, "I'll tussle with the Jedi. I will do whatever I need to do," and he's not afraid, and I wonder if he learned that from Django, because coming from the slums of Duros, who knows when he even first encountered a Jedi? So that would have been, like, dealing with that, because the Jedi would have still been these amazing warriors, these amazing mysterious space wizards with all their powers and their lightsabers, probably would have been quite mystical to him. And he probably had to learn, like, no, they're not as badass as you think. Like, we have the means to deal with them.
Right. He's aware of the Force and the super mystical thing that he doesn't really understand, but at the same time, he's pragmatic enough to box them into a category, say, okay, they're defeatable. Here's how. At the end of the day, all that stuff is just mumbo jumbo to me. Again, we've had a discussion before, you and I personally. He's invested more in the material world than anything else. To him, anything outside of the physical does not exist, and it does not fit into his worldview, his narrative, his day to day, importance. And that's all it is. Everything else is just fat, and he just cuts it out. He cuts the fat out of his life. He recognized the Jedi exist. He's like, okay, the Force may exist, but it's not relevant to me or my goals. And again, he's the little eye. He's not the big eye. He doesn't connect that overarching, Force. He's just one cog in the machine, and he kind of recognizes that. But he's fine with being in the machine as long as he's the biggest cog.
Exactly, exactly. He's a realist, some would say, at the
He's
end of the
yes.
day.
In a way,
He's
maybe
like,
he's more right than others. You just got to kill a
right?
few people.
Exactly. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. You have to respect a pragmatic approach.
I mean, look. If you're weighing it that way, he's more successful than Mace Windu in that he survived the Clone Wars. He did not die in that Sith takeover in Order 66 and all that. He lived, many more years. From a pragmatic approach, even though Mace Windu killed Django, he would consider Mace a quote unquote loser because he died, and Cad was smart enough to have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the know how to get into this next age and navigate these very new waters. It's the first empire. It's
Yeah,
the new republic when that begins. He knows how to carve out his niche.
exactly. I mean, that's, I guess, the not that it's ever good to stay neutral in a conflict from a moral and ethical point of view, but the people who are just like, "I'm gonna stand here on the sides and see how it plays out, and I'm on the side of the winner."
Hmm.
That's essentially what Bane does. It's a neutral survivalist mentality of, you guys can go around and you can cut each other's heads off and you can do all this nonsense for your belief. For your belief system, if you want to go toe to toe for your belief system and you're willing to die for that, that's great. I don't share that same adamance for any kind of belief system. So I'm going to be over here. Just waiting in the wings to see who comes out on top and who wants to pay me the most money for my services.
And it's shown. Some people may argue that his overall arc is repetitive. It's okay, job done, some job presented to him, some danger, job completed, and so on and so on. But in each of those, in that repetition, you see more and more unearthed of his psyche, of his issues, of his untreated issues. I think he's always masking his problems. I think there's a lot of pain and suffering, and he's unable to experience joy. He won't allow himself to experience joy because that would dent who he is in his profession. To him, the profession comes above the personal, and it
Oh,
becomes the
absolutely.
personal. It becomes its one identity. But he cannot soften himself by any means. If he did, he wouldn't be who he is.
Right? Right, and I feel like that's the life of a lot of bounty hunters kind of in this universe. I think the only softenings we ever really see on in any bounty hunter story is, of course, Din Djarin, the Mandalorian.
Mhm.
He gets his life tangled up with Grogu, and suddenly he's a big soft space zaddy. And I think, the storyline with with Ventress.
Yes.
Um,
With her and Quinlan Vos too.
yeah, no, I mean, really just I can't wait to do a Ventress episode. It's one of my it's very high at the top of my list. Because just the tragedy of her character, just being
Yes.
trained as a Padawan, then being a fallen Jedi, then being pulled into all of, like, the Sith nonsense, being dropped by Dooku, trying to go back to the Night Sisters get murdered, then her life as a bounty hunter, and she has those soft moments where she's like, "Yeah, I'm efficient, I'm well trained, I'm gonna do what I need to do, but I have a little bit of a moral code. I can I can respect when people are suffering because I have suffered." And I think those are really the soft moments we get with bounty hunters. We don't get too many others.
Well,
Um
it's interesting because in the Bounty Hunters comic, which just ended, and it was a fantastic run from 2020 till now. They show the softer side through Bailart Valance or Bylart. There's a lot of discrepancy how his name is pronounced. He hasn't been in the
mhm,
movie yet, but you know, he's a cyborg. Everything's taken away. A lot has to do with his love. You know, love with other individuals, with other people. You know, it makes them see beyond the small eye. It softens them, and it gives them something to fight for. Boba Fett, when he had the
mhm,
Sand People, the Tusken Raiders, after getting out of the Sarlacc pit, you know, they were attached to him, and he found out from Bane, oh, they're dead. They were murdered by the Pike Syndicate. A lot of that is when they realize when they start to care about someone else, then it's not just so easy to be so cavalier and throw it all away. There's a lot more that they're fighting for, and you see that in certain bounty hunters. But and I have to say that makes them stronger. Love makes them stronger. Like Din Djarin, you know, the Mandalorian, Boba Fett, yeah, even Violet Valance. It keeps them alive actually because they have something worth fighting for, and it makes them stronger, and they refuse to die. I think that's also another element to it. I think the bounty hunters like Cad Bane and whatnot, who have no one, you know, who are detached from all that. I think at the end it makes them weaker, despite their view of love as weak. You know, I think it's actually a weakness, and they're not the full selves that they can be. They're not as complete, but that's the irony. It eludes them.
mm. Very well put. And shout out to the expanded universe for providing us with that kind of character development. I feel like that's the fun part about the comics is we get all these super interesting characters that haven't yet been brought into the visual universe, but they can still have such enriching stories.
And that's how you learn Boss eats his siblings. Yeah, it's fantastic.
So much you can learn from comic books. Um, and as we move forward, just especially in Clone Wars, with Bane just popping up for like these never really one episode. He'll pop up for like a 2, 3 episode arc, particularly over the big jobs that we see him involved in the Clone Wars. So we have the heist of the Jedi Temple, where he
Hmm.
steals a holocron, which is crazy. Like he is employed directly by Darth Sidious to infiltrate the Jedi Temple. Him and another shapeshifting bounty hunter basically impersonate Jedi, get into the library, get into the archive, to steal this holocron, and they successfully do this. Which I mean, if you love a good heist movie or a heist storyline, great episode. It's
It's
absolutely great episode.
fantastic. When I first saw it, I was like, "There's no way they're pulling this off." It didn't. It's not possible. But he's good on his feet. He's very quick. He deals situation to situation because so you don't know if you're going to walk into somewhere and there's a tripwire or someone's going to just rain blaster fire on you. Yet you know here they are surviving because he does what he does. He's confident
Right?
in himself. He walks the walk. He's very self assured.
And you also don't even know, and I think this is very interesting then him just kind of knowing how to deal with Jedi because you don't even know what Jedi magic tricks you might run into. Like, are people gonna be able to tell that you're a shapeshifter? Is there gonna be like what kind of guards are
Right.
in place of these holocrons? Like, so for him to even know how to get access to this, the amount of detail, the amount of research, and the amount of cunning it takes. It's quite impressive.
And
Um,
he doesn't know if he could be mentally, kind of incapacitated by a Jedi mind trick. For instance, later on in that interrogation, he starts to lose himself. There's always that threat too, just to be
yeah.
kind of like numbed out, not just
Yeah, no,
physically.
it's yeah, no, and it's so interesting that that's one of the very few moments where we see Cad like kind of vulnerable because he's like, whoa, like because I mean, gets like Jedi like has who was it? It was Mace Windu, Anakin, and Obi-Wan trying to force dig their way into his brain. And
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was
and it took a
like,
lot.
and he was thrown for a goddamn loop. He was like, oh my God, please stop what you're doing.
But he resisted hard. He was at first because his psyche is so interesting to me. I think he has a lot of, even though they were digging in and getting to him. There was He is master of his domain, to quote Seinfeld. He's very much um as mentally fractured as he can be by I would like to think his early years in abuse. I think just his situation was tough. I think it also hardened him and gave him a lot of layers to dig through, and that's why he was a little bit more cognizant of what was going on, whereas he wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to stop selling death sticks, you know.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's interesting, and that kind of makes me also think about like his species, the Duros, because there are several
Mhm.
alien species that are actually
Mhm.
resistant to the Force. At least to the Jedi mind tricks. You have the
Watto, yeah.
yeah, you have
I'm a
Geonosians.
Tartarian. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about like with Geonosians who are just like, no, like that doesn't work on us. Sorry. And so who knows? Maybe Duros are a little bit like force resistant, maybe. Or maybe yeah, it's just
Hmm.
the assuredness of one's mind, and Bane seems to be someone who's very self-assured. So,
Well, that's an
um
interesting point too. Maybe certain races in the galaxy have like maybe a midichlorian count. Episode one kind of opened the box there with the biology of it. The biological spirituality. So maybe there is a certain count in him that allows him to be resistant.
yeah. Yeah, no, and they come across planets and species that have like special connections to the Force, even though they don't wield it the same as the Jedi or the Sith.
Hmm.
You have species like the Night Sisters, like the Dathomiri Night Sisters, who have like their magic is powered by the dark side, but they're not Sith, like they're not the same. Like, but they happen to use like the Force is everywhere. And everyone uses it or doesn't use it in their own way. Um, and yeah, no, it's just interesting, like to see not only Bane battle with Jedi, but then like for him to come face to face with that Force influence, and probably not only have to admit that the Force exists, kind of like how Han Solo later on is like, "Oh, I don't believe in
Yeah.
that mumbo jumbo," until he like
Yeah.
has to acknowledge it. He's like, "Yeah, no, it's real. The Force is real."
Hmm.
Maybe that was like Cad Bane's realization moment of like, "Oh my god, it's real. I get it. Please stop. Get out of my brain."
Yeah, yeah. Or even again, if it just is real to him or not, he just says whatever it is, just don't bring it in my lane. Stay in your lane. I'll stay in mine. I don't need life to be
Exactly.
more complicated than it is.
Exactly, right? Um, and then of course the storyline shows just his I mean, kind of his lack of moral boundaries. Of course, because the point of stealing the holocron was to be able it was a list of basically all the force sensitive children in the galaxy. And so he steals this and then gives it to Sidious, and he's basically like, "Okay, now I want you to go take some of these kids and like bring them to me on Mustafar." And he's just
Yes.
like, "Okay, yeah, for the right." He's like, "It's gonna be triple my regular rate." But yeah, that sounds great. I don't care about kidnapping some
No
kids,
morals, right? Yeah, no, that's literally
right?
child trafficking at that point. He's bringing them to an evil Sith. There's no one more evil
Yeah.
in the galaxy than Sidious, and that just shows you, there is no level to that to which he won't stoop, Cad Bane,
Yeah.
as long as the
Yeah.
price is right.
Exactly. And that's of course when you do have to start to like accept like, okay, yes, not every bounty hunter is a villain, but Cad Bane certainly is. Like, okay,
Yes.
now you're not just like, okay, self-preservation, I'm just out for my money. It's like I will do whatever for the money. Like, doesn't really matter to me. Like, I'll kill whoever, do whatever. And actually that is something else they pulled from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So Angel Eyes kills a kid in that movie. I'd have to look at the scene again and the context, but he does like shoot a child, and which is really crazy to show in a movie in 1966.
Yeah.
But that's something they pulled. They pulled from that character. Also, is just the ruthlessness. And he's like, "I'll do what I need to do. Like I'm not worried about it." And so that's a very, I think, important part of his character. Just that lack of limits. That he's like, if it's for the job and I'm gonna get paid, like let's go.
Yeah, yeah, he just keeps a very, I don't wanna say narrow bandwidth, but he keeps the, visors on. O he's
Yeah.
just very focused. He's like, "This is all that matters. Nothing outside of this is a possibility. I have to focus on point A to point B. That's it. Life is simple." And I think that pathology makes him an effective professional, but, it ruins his soul. You know, it's kind of like Voldemort. It just each job takes a little bit out of him and makes him less and less redemptive or less likely to be redeemed. You know,
Right.
he's too hardened by that point. He didn't have a son to save him like Anakin did
Exactly, right?
that we know of.
That goes back to the question of does Bane be fucking?
Yeah, yeah. Does
In
he
order to
have
have
does he have a
right,
penis? Yeah,
right,
blue
right.
balls.
Um, and so and I think that actually leads to a very interesting point about just his point of view. Like as far as like how does he actually view all the things that he's doing and the people that he encounters and works with. And I just had a really great time listening to the audiobook version of a book by Lou Anders that came out in 2020, The Clone Wars: Stories of Light and Dark. And it's really fantastic. I can't wait to listen to the rest of it because particularly on audiobook, that's like my new kick is audiobooks.
Yeah, it's growing in
Because
publishing. Yep.
exactly. Like I live in New York City. I'm always commuting, moving around. I can't be holding a book all the time. So it's nice to be able to listen to them like I listen to podcasts. Like you should all listen to podcasts like Mind the Force.
Like this one,
Um
yes, yes.
exactly. Like just like this. And so what was great, so every chapter is from like a different character that was well known throughout the Clone Wars arcs. And so there's a Bane chapter. There's a Cad Bane chapter read. Oh, I'd have to see what voice actor did it. But it was read in Cad Bane's voice, which is fantastic. It was so good. And it was his version. It was like his point of view of the plot to kidnap Senator Palpatine. That happens. I want to say that season Ahsoka wasn't season 5. I want to say that was
Yeah,
season 5 of Clone Wars because Ahsoka was still there.
yes, correct.
Yeah,
Right. That's a good point. Right.
yeah, Ahsoka was still there. So it's definitely season 5, and it's from Bane's point of view. So it's him like helping Evolve break out of the prison. It's meeting Rako Hardeen, who we as the viewer of course know is Obi-Wan Kenobi in disguise, trying to unveil this exact plot that's playing out. So shout out to Obi-Wan doing a good job. Um and I find it very interesting, and like the whole thing that happens, like the bounty hunter tournament that Dooku sets off, and then of course the actual kidnapping of Senator Palpatine that gets later thwarted. Um, and it's his point of view of it and kind of what he thinks like about Rocco Hardeen, about how he really didn't like him, didn't trust him, kind of wished he would go away. He's like, I'm gonna plug this guy at some point because he's getting on my nerves. Um, it was very it's a he has a very funny account of what he thinks of Anakin and Ahsoka that is just hysterical. He's like Skywalker and that little one with the horns.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fantastic. He's like, and they just lose their minds. Like they're just coming after me to get revenge, or they're coming after Hardeen to get revenge for Kenobi, and it's really putting a damper on my day.
Right, that's how he
uh,
looks at it as an inconvenience. And I'm sorry, I see Friends and Enemies is season 4, the one with Palpatine, and then later on it goes the box and whatnot. I think that's more season 5.
Ah, okay. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it all blends together,
It
honestly.
all blends together. Oh my god. Especially when you're just binging through Clone Wars, you're like, "I don't know what season
It's
I'm in,
one.
but I
I do
know
go by.
exactly what's going on."
I do frame it by Ahsoka's presence. I'm like, okay, if she's got that was season 6, the lost episode, season 7 when she
Exactly.
returns. That's okay, yeah, that helps. That helps.
Right? Like, right, you have to plot it out like, "Okay, what has happened? Is Mandalore involved yet? Like, have we met Satine? Do we know this is going on?"
Yeah,
How deteriorated is Anakin and Padme's relationship? Where are we?
right,
Like,
exactly.
um And what I find so interesting throughout that great storyline of the Senator Palpatine kidnapping is when they're in that bounty hunter tournament and like Raggle Hardine's just like kind of getting them through every round, which of course Dooku and Aval see and like Dooku's suspicious, Aval's upset, blah blah blah. Um, and when that moment when Hardine saves Bane and Bane, like, doesn't and that little look where, like, Bane doesn't know what to do with that because it's somebody who didn't have to help him did. It was this not really a random act of kindness, but it was a kindness, and it almost, like, took him back for a moment to be like, "Oh, like, why did" to almost be like the look on his face was, "Why did you help me when you did not have
Right.
to?"
That doesn't fit
Especially
into his morality,
exactly, like,
his
it
views of moral.
exactly, like, it threw him, especially for someone who he's been traveling with this person for a bit, has been very open about the fact that he hates this guy, has, I think, double crossed him at twice by this point. And the fact that, like, he would still save him, like, stop I think he stopped him from falling down into, like, the toxic gas in one of the rounds, and then but then by Bane's moral by Bane's moral code, now he owes him.
Yes.
Kind of like how he
Yes.
mentions later, "Oh, I owe," like, in discussing Boba Fett, that he's like, "Oh, I owe Django a couple of favors. So, let me" he doesn't live in anybody's debt. He's very much like, "Okay, you did me a favor, I'm gonna pay you back, and, like, we're even." He's like,
It's
I'm not indebted to anyone, I don't owe anybody anything."
everything is very much a one to one. It's like it just has to be everything's got to be balanced and even, and even what Dooku's involvement in all that too. That's very when they're in the box, uh, Dooku's kind of trying to push evil on everyone. He wants his plans, the Sith plan, to be pushed forward. Yet there's a contest of wills here. The
Yeah.
thing is with the Sith, they don't realize their will isn't paramount. They may have a lot of power, however, the will of the rebellion overthrew them. The will of the Jedi overthrew them. Even here, Cad Bane is a very willful character. You know, uh, he may not always get what he wants, even though he normally does. But he's going to make it hard for the opposition to cross his will when he has an end goal.
Oh, absolutely.
He's going to give him a
100%.
hard time.
Yeah. Um, and so of course, like in the next round in the box, he then saves Hardine in return.
Yeah,
And yes, it's that like you said, that one-to-one exchange, like the job for the money, or you saved me, okay, I'm gonna save you. All right, now we're even, we're done. Um, and I think later when he finds out that Hardine is Obi-Wan in disguise, which then puts like Obi-Wan on Cad Bane's shit list.
yeah.
He feels I think he feels a little sense of betrayal when he's just like, "I knew there was something about you the whole time, like, I never trusted you." But it's like, he very rarely gets hysterical or upset. I don't know, and that's what I saw, was just like, "Oh, like, I thought I could trust you, and I was wrong, oh, you double crossed me, you tricked me, now I feel stupid, now I'm going back to jail, and, like, now this mission failed, I'm not gonna get paid for all the bullshit I just did, and you deceived me." Like, I got comfortable enough to get deceived, and I think that just rips through him, and he's like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah. And maybe that echoes from previous abuse that we haven't necessarily seen where someone did
Yeah.
betray him. He's like, I can't believe I got suckered. I'm smart, I'm the best. And Obi-Wan, a Jedi, are you kidding me? Like a
Yeah.
Jedi? Like there's a real people don't like the Jedi because they're a moral force in the universe. And it runs counter to their selfish narratives because again, the Jedi are not selfish in theory at least. But
Yeah,
they
right?
don't like the existence of them, and but that also bothers Cad because he's also ironically framing that same moral network where he's like, oh, Jedi are supposed to be like these holier than thou, and yet here they are betraying and being like me. They're brought down to my level. What the heck? So it's a
Right?
catch-22 sort of. He doesn't want the Jedi to exist, and yet he doesn't want them to break their code.
Exactly. He even says in the book, he says, there used to be a time when you could trust the Jedi to give you a fair fight.
Exactly.
And for him, like, that was just like wrecked after that. He already didn't love the Jedi. He wasn't a big fan, and that just ruined it. He's like, nope, now I'm perfectly content working for these dark Sith guys, whatever the fuck they're doing. Don't really care because they pay well. Like,
Exactly. Everything needs to be. He has a very simplistic view in terms of that. Like with the 101, everything is just a very clean, neat view of the universe. If it gets too messy, he doesn't want to deal with that. At least on a mental level. Physically
yeah,
it gets very messy, but he just
yeah.
wants everything to be within a box, very ordered, very much within what he's able to handle. He likes to have control, and that's another part of his mental state and his psyche and his behavior, his whole character. He needs to be in control. He can never be the one relying on someone else. He has to steer the ship.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, he always has to be in control. Like, even with the whole box tournament, like, by the end of it, Dooku was like, Cad Bane's gonna lead this, and he's like, duh. Like, I wasn't going to not. Like,
Right.
he's
Like
like,
only
at
one of you
no
is going to make it
point
out.
yeah, at no point was anybody going to be better than me, and, like, I wasn't gonna follow someone else's lead. Like, he's not a follower.
No, he's like, they're all idiots
100%.
for being here against me because I'm clearly walking out of this. Yeah.
Yeah, he even, like, killed that guy for his hat. He was like, "Nice hat. Where'd you get it?" Pow. Like, "I'm gonna take your hat."
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and so that actually brings us to possibly my favorite thing about Cad's story is his relationship with Boba Fett.
Mhm.
So so the Lou Anders book, that chapter is actually Cad Bane telling his version of the senator kidnapping plot to Boba and Bosk when he's back in jail. So it's like very much like his recount of it after it happens, and he's back in prison in a cell with them. He obviously already knows Boba, because Boba was the one who caused the distraction that led Bane Aval and Hardeen the ability to even like break out of the prison. Like, he basically paid him, said he was going to pay him, because that's what they're discussing in that chapter is, hey, we caused that distraction for you and you said you were going to pay us, so like, what's good with the payment? And it's him telling the story of what happened and why, like, he doesn't have money because he got double crossed. And by the end of it, like Bane's thinking to himself, and he starts thinking about, like, this Boba kid's not so bad. Like, I could probably team up with him and like get a lot done. Like, he like knows how to get things done. And I owe his dad a couple of favors because obviously he had that relationship with Jango Fett. And now he's looking at Boba Fett. But it's not like it's a little bit of like a mentor thing, but it's goes back to that survivalist competitiveness. Cause never forget, like, Bane wants to be the best. He wants to
Yes.
be the best. He wants to be the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. And he could never really earn that title because he didn't kill Django. So he is looking at a consolation prize in Boba Fett. Like, hey, if I can train this kid to like be the best, to really come up and be like somebody as a bounty hunter, which he already is. Like, people know Boba Fett, even like he's a young teenager at this stage. Um, if I could train him to be the best and I can kill him, then I will have earned the title of the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. And I'm like, that's a little twisted. Okay. That's
And right, I think he kind of mentors him too to put his stain and say, I'm your daddy, not
right,
Django. I
daddy.
am. You are learning from me. Any part of you, I am. That's more me. I am washing more of Django out. You are less of Fett and more of Bane. You're a Boba
Exactly.
Bane.
You're
That's
both
how he
me.
wants to. And that bothers Boba Fett a lot. I think in his mentality because he loves his father very much. It's so apparent, even though it's himself. And even in the comics, in the last issue of Bounty Hunters, they say, "Aren't you just a replica?" He's like, "Careful." They're just basically saying like, aren't you just a clone? Is that really even your dad? Can you even count that as your dad? And it's an interesting concept when you think about human cloning, but that definitely shows up in his hatred towards Cad Bane, because he's trying to also remove his father from him, and this is a
Yeah.
reclamation of the Fett dynasty in his mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's interesting to that point is, I mean, the fact that Boba Django made that specific request of like, okay, fine, you can use my DNA to make clones, whatever, but like I want a clone for myself. Like I want a son and he raised him. And that's nurture versus nature. Like he was raised as Django's son. Like that's who taught him to be who he was. And so I think that's why his like plot of revenge was so powerful, because like against Mace Windu for killing Django, because it wasn't like, "Oh, I'm getting revenge for Jango Fett." It's like, "No, I'm getting revenge for my dad. Like, you killed my dad basically right in
Yes.
front of me, and so I'm gonna take you out in revenge." Um, but I do think I could see that, just Bane being like a little bit of like an F you to Django by being like, "Okay, now I'm gonna mold your son's mind, like,
Hmm.
to my benefit, to my intentions." Um and I think that there's like there I read actually that this was a storyline that was supposed to be in Clone Wars. Was kind of the mentor-mentee relationship between Bane and
Yes.
Boba, but then
And
of
never made it.
course everything yeah, it just never made it into it, and then of course the lost episodes and then all the years before season 7. God bless Dave Filoni for making season 7 happen.
Yes.
For the masterwork that that is. And yeah, no, this was one of the storylines that fell to the wayside. And there's very interesting I guess fan renderings online. I forget what they're exactly supposed to be called, but basically these like computer animated versions of these storylines. And this one that they
Yeah.
show that is very important is the duel between Cad Bane and like young Boba Fett. And
Yes.
yeah, because they've kind of formed this little team, this little bounty hunter team, led by Cad and like being like Boba Fett's like second in command. And of course Bosk is there. Bosk is always there. I wonder where he is later on, because he's not in Boba Fett, the show. What happened to Bosk? Um, and it's interesting. So they just have different philosophies about how to go about stuff, because as Boba's getting older, he's also developing his own moral code, which we, of course, see play out a lot deeper in the book of Boba Fett. But he wants to have a line in the sand. He wants to have a moral code to live by. It's not like, oh, we're going to take whatever job we can because they're paying. He's like, no, like, I don't want to take those kind of jobs. I don't think that we should. And so they're kind of fighting for seniority. And that's when they end up having this duel that is like, okay, Bane's like, all right, this is it. I'm finally going to kill this kid and I'm going to be the best in the universe and everybody's going to know it. And so they have a very standard Western style standoff, because we can't forget our Western tropes with Cad
Hmm.
Bane ever. And they have this Western style standoff, like quickest gun in the West, like quickest draw of pistols, or blasters, would be blasters. And it is an absolute tie. It is an absolute tie. They both get a headshot off on either one. Boba's in his standard like Mandalorian armor, and Bane has. I mean, he's outfitted in his armor, and so there is some sort of protection for both of them. Like Boba has a helmet on. Bane essentially has a head covering on, and they both fall to the ground. Because yeah, they both got shot in the head. So that's what
Yes.
causes the famous dent in Boba Fett's helmet, which I thought was really cool to find this content where it's like, oh my god, it's like that Spider-Man. No, it's that Leonardo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he's like, oh, that's the thing. That's like what that was me learning that. I was like, oh, that's the thing that caused the dent. And it also causes a permanent injury to Cad Bane as well. And now he's fucking embarrassed because he just in a dual tie with a teenager. And
Yeah, that's
at this point, Cad Bane is 30. He's 30 years old, which is something
mhm.
important to note for later. Or no, sorry. At this point, he's
Wait,
40.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah,
Yeah,
because,
sorry, he's 40.
he was born '60, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so at this point, he's 40 years old. He just lost a duel to a kid, and they basically go their separate ways. And from there, you kind of just see Bane in these little one-off adventures. Like that's when you really see him in the comic book series. What is the name of that comic book series? The one is it Hyperspace Adventures?
Yes, that's the new adventures, just hyperspace stories,
Hyperspace
Star Wars
Stories.
Adventures was the IDW, this is the Dark Horse reclaiming the adventures.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and in those you really just see him in not really a lot of character development per se, but just the one-off adventure stories, the bounty hunter stories. Um, I mean, which are always great. Everyone loves adventure stories. But what I think is then very interesting is to see like where he pops up along the way. Because obviously he wasn't a character that was developed for the original trilogy. He was kind of on George Lucas's mind. There are some early sketches of a character that they pulled for Cad Bane, which I think is very interesting behind the scenes. That when they were developing a new antagonist, bounty hunter, for the Clone Wars, um, kind of the image of it was from notes of George Lucas from like years before. So that's kind of cool.
I love the full circle, I love how that all ties.
I love full circle stuff. All from the mind of George Lucas.
And yeah,
And
he gets a lot of flack, but, he created it all.
exactly, he created it all, and he's sitting on a ranch chilling with his $1 billion.
Just
Like
watching the movies.
just watch the movies, guys. You're fine. Like, okay, I'm terrible. You guys are terrible. um, and and I think that it's very interesting the way that the way that he just kind of like is able to be like inserted into things. Like you can always use a bounty hunter. You can always use kind of a moralist badass, and like we said before, like when Bane enters a situation, like he's about to fuck some shit up. Like, that's the
Oh,
image that he's built for himself. That's the reputation he's built for himself. That like something's about to get done because he
and
gets things done.
and for whatever Palpatine was, of course he's evil, genocidal, Sith Lord, but
Mhm.
he recognizes talent. He only goes for the best of the best. He's like, this is a perfect, pawn or cat's paw, whatever you want to say. He's like the perfect person for this job because I can rely on his competence here. And he's necessary, even though he's a small piece in my galactic takeover. Damn, Cad Bane's got it. He's earned it, and that's
Right?
that's a big compliment
He
to Cad.
does he does like he likes someone who delivers. He likes someone who
Absolutely.
delivers. I mean, that's why he liked Vader for so long, despite their very complicated relationship, which we will get into later on.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
That's why he likes Thrawn. That's why he likes Mara Jade. Like that's why he likes a doer. He likes an executor. um, but I like these little one-off stories that he pops up in. He pops up in Bad Batch to kidnap Omega because who else would they call? Like, okay, we have these like rogue clones that have taken like this essential piece of the larger cloning scheme that is obviously Sidious's big picture, which I love that they're retconning that so clearly. It's really great to see
Yes,
those pieces like falling together. Um, because remember that was always Plagueis's big picture was I want to live forever. I'm gonna fuck the galaxy up because I want to live forever. Sidious has accepted after he offed Plagueis that that's not going to happen. You can't live
hmm
forever, but maybe you can clone yourself and maybe you can keep it going. and that's his whole end game. He will throw the galaxy into absolute chaos. He will start wars. The amount of wars that get started in Star Wars for the like end goal of someone is a very long list. Like, who knows
But
if these
it's
wars would have actually started for legitimate reasons if someone did not orchestrate them.
right, it is that it comes down to that God complex. You see it in Harry Potter with Voldemort,
Yep.
it's all these people had to die for his quest for immortality because he was insecure. That goes even to Hitler. He wanted a 1,000-year Reich. Many
Mm,
figures in history, they want this immortality, which is not possible. I think they're seeking the wrong view of what life is and the way to go forward. And people like Palpatine, you know, everyone's manipulated. It changes everyone's lifestyles. Those who live, their whole ways of life are just, they're thrown into disarray. But people like Cad Bane, they make order out of that. They say, okay, new rules here, new rules in this game, but I'm going to shape it, all this chaos, into some order and really prosper from it. Even at others' expense.
exactly. Exactly. Absolutely.
Do you want to go into his death? I guess since we're near the end.
Yeah, yeah, no, let's get into his possible final hurrah. What we also believe on Mind the Force is unless we've confirmed you're dead, you might not be dead. So just like I believe that Mace Windu survived, it's quite possible Cad Bane survived this, but we'll let you be the judges of that. So, in the Book of Boba Fett, we get a very special treat of live action Cad Bane, who I think they knocked out of the park.
It's the best. It's the best
Oh my
adaptation. Better than Thrawn.
god.
Sorry,
And
better Blue
right?
translation.
Oh god, I had such high hopes for Thrawn. And like he looks so cool in pictures, but then like in moving around, I'm like,
It's different.
also also he got kind of fat in that other galaxy. Like he had a bit
Yeah,
of a
he
tummy,
was.
and it's just like, oh honey, you could have done some crunches for this role because, like, Thrawn was like a badass warrior. Like, but
It, lay
ugh,
off the Jawa juice, Thrawn. Yeah,
right, lay off the bantha milk, man.
the
Like,
bantha milk. Yeah, yeah.
but we digress back to Bane. And yes, just that image of Bane coming through the dusty desert, like into a very small western town to face off with Cobb Vanth. Actually, not even to face off with him. He's coming to deliver a message, and Cobb
Don't
Vanth
get
wasn't
involved.
having it.
Stay neutral.
Um, exactly. Like, just let the drugs run through the territory. Probably
He's
break
an
you off a little
enforcer.
something, something.
He
Yeah, no,
became an enforcer.
he's the
Yeah.
muscle. He's like, I didn't even come here to kill you. Didn't come here to do anything. I'm delivering a message. That was my job,
He's
and
like,
he
this is
just
this
does his
is
job.
Avon Barksdale's corner. Basically, it became the Wire. Yeah, and he's like, and it was a shootout. It was like a Western shootout. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the best. Like, Dave Filoni really wanted to show that. Like, you could tell that was a passion scene that he had, a passion
Oh,
project.
absolutely. Oh, he loves westerns. He loves bringing in that aspect because it's already like we talked about such a classic trope across Star Wars that he's like, let's just drive that home. Straight up western shootout, two cowboys, like Cobb Vanth and his light colored shirt and his beautiful light colored hair. Like basically he's Clint Eastwood. And Cad Bane is Van Cleef, and this is just live action, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And yeah, no, Bane takes him out, takes his deputy out, and tells the people of the town whatever. Didn't they give their town a new name, like Happy
What was it?
Town?
Free was Freetown before,
Yeah, it was no,
or
the
was that? No,
new name was
that was.
Freetown. There's the new name.
Oh, I gotta
It
look.
used to be one of the Mosses. It used to be a Moss something.
It was Mos Pelgo, and it
Moss
became
Pelgo.
Freetown, right?
Freetown. Like, that's a
Yeah,
super unoriginal name, guys, super unoriginal.
yeah.
You couldn't
Happyville, yeah, yeah.
right, Happyville, you could've
Hey,
named it
well,
anything.
we come from Freeport, to be honest, but that's more with to do with trade.
Facts.
But
That is also super hypocritical. We don't
I
care
just
with
realized
Freeport.
that. But
It's
hey,
like Joey's gonna troll us for that. Be like, "No, you're not from Freeport." Hating on Freetown. Um, but yes, he kills the beloved sheriff of Freetown, who everyone loved Cobb Vanth. I was so sad when Cobb Vanth died. He was a great character. But yeah, no, he offs him pretty straightforward for Cad Bane, not a hard day at the office. And then he realizes that he's stepped on Mr. Boba Fett's toes, who is now the I love saying this word, the Daimyo. Is that
Daimyo,
it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's Japanese, yeah,
Daimyo.
yeah.
Thank you.
Like the feudal
Uh,
lords, yeah.
yes, he is now Daimyo Boba Fett, and he has now stepped on his toes and strolls on into Mos Espa looking for a fight with his old mentee, who he hasn't seen in 30 years. Like, there's no, at least at this point, there is no evidence of Bane and Boba Fett's paths crossing again, and their interaction really shows, like, oh, this is the first time they're seeing each other again. Like, that's the vibe that it's giving, and that's a lot of history. That's a lot of history between Bane and Django, and then everything. Because I don't know how many years Bane and Boba were together in there, because that's something that gets a little unclear sometimes in the comics, is like how much time has passed. And so I don't know how long they were together in their little like band of bounty hunters. I guess it may have
Y
been, yeah, does it say?
Yeah, the thing is, it's like they wanted to finish Clone Wars and all that and stuff. A lot of stuff didn't get explored. It's just there, and I want to see this fleshed out. I think hopefully one day they will. But
Yeah.
it's just a lot of it is under the surface. It's just a pressure cooker that's been going on forever.
Exactly, exactly. This is just a long time rivalry, ended in very, very bad blood. They both shot each other in the head. I don't think a relationship can deteriorate any further than that. And they have their standoff, and Cat is just loving it with his sharp little razor teeth and his big red eyes. And he is just like here to just emotionally dig into Boba, because he's like, okay, the Pike Syndicate, they killed that little Tusken Raider family that you had, and that definitely hurt Boba in a deep way. And just reminding him, like, you were a kid. Like, I was better than you. I've always been better than you. Like, what do you think, that you're standing on some like moral soapbox now? You think you're a good guy? Like I've been in the trenches with you. Like, I've murdered people with you. I've
Yeah,
seen you in your darkest places, and you think that, what, you're some big shot now? Like, just really just morally digging into his psyche. Basically
yeah,
trying to throw him
yeah.
off his game, to be like, "Hey, if
It's
we're gonna do this, if I'm finally gonna murder you, like, I need to make it a little easier for myself, because now I'm 70 years old." Um,
right.
and now Boba is the age that Bane was during their
Hmm.
first duel. So it's proper 30 years later. Boba Fett's 40. Bane is 70, looking great for 70, by the way. Hasn't aged a day, but he's
The
still
parallelism, yeah. Wow.
still doing it. Um, and but I mean, he must know, like, maybe I've gotten a little slow over the years. I don't know what he's really been up to. So he's like, I'm gonna play that psychological game. I can't just be guns a blazing coming out with force. Like, I gotta break him down a little emotionally and put him off his game.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I need to get the upper hand here and also assert dominance. It's very much kind of always sunny, Glenn Howerton, his
Yeah,
character. He just needs to be the biggest, dick on the block. And it doesn't go well for him because I think he pulls a lion's tail. I think Boba Fett is like, you're just provoking me. And now you're just giving me more of a reason to actually kill you and show you no mercy.
exactly. Poking the bear.
And you see the
And
shock in his eyes. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When he gets stabbed in the chest by that Tuscan weapon, definitely shock. He did not expect to get stabbed.
And that's poetic justice because even though he was kind of reminding him about the Tuscan massacre by the Pike Syndicate, um the fact that he kills him with that weapon shows Boba he's like, I killed you, me the son of Boba Fett, and this weapon killed you, the weapon of the Tuscan Raiders, yeah,
Yeah. Not
of
the
Jango Fett, sorry, the
way
son of Jango, yeah,
Yeah, like, and not the way that you taught me. Like, because I think
right,
that, like you said, how Bane was kinda trying to, like, I don't think I would say weasel, because that's a weird word. Like, just trying to, like, wedge his way in as, like, a father figure to Boba to obviously ultimately betray him. But like that he was able to take his like teachings from his father Django, take his teachings from the Tusken Raiders who really became his family, um, and use that to take out this other father figure where it's like, I didn't need you. I didn't need you to be who I am today. Like I had these other figures who shaped me. And like I'm gonna take you out with the tools that they taught me. Definitely very symbolic.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's like I'm retaining my identity. Your identity is irrelevant to me. Maybe you're part of my past, present, but you're not going to be a part of my future. You exit the story here. And that's what freaks Cad Bane out because his whole identity is shattered in that moment. Everything he built up was around this identity. Now that small eye is disappearing from the galaxy. He has nothing to cling to. He's like, what's my legacy? What do I leave behind? That, those thoughts
Yeah.
are racing through his mind besides mere death. It's not just a bodily death, but to him, it's an identity death.
Oh, absolutely. Because his whole life has been that competitive survivalist mode. Like he equated being successful with being the best,
Hmm.
which I found very um I found a great kind of similarity between him and Anakin in that way. Cause that's how a young Anakin really felt like I'm only successful if I'm the best. That extreme
Yes.
that extreme competitiveness, and that's really what Bane had, and he's like, "I need to go out on top, so I'm gonna take my top spot from you, and then I could really go out on my own terms." And that's not what happened for him, and that's tragic in a way.
In
I
a
mean, but
sense, right.
also, did he deserve it? Like, I mean, he's still a
Well,
villain at the end of the day, like
whatever his interior feelings, maybe, it's very sad and you could have some empathy, but ultimately, the karmic retribution came back. He's killed and hurt so many that it really, it's frankly a surprise it did not happen sooner. It's a testament
right?
to his skill and survival skills, but it was just a matter of time. The boomerang was bound to come back and it did. And it was through the person that at that point that he hated most. And there's nothing more
Exactly.
poetically perfect with that justice.
I think that Star Wars does a really good job of that, of taking out antagonists by having them like die by the hands of the person they hated the most. Because think about Maul dying at the hands of Kenobi in the Tatooine desert.
Hmm.
A lot of people die in the Tatooine desert because it
Yeah,
was also on
it's a place to
Tatooine.
die.
It's the place
Yeah.
to die. Yeah, no, same thing. Like the person that Bane literally trained with the intention of betraying is who killed him in the end.
Yes, exactly.
The
And it
son
just
of the
shows you
son of his greatest rival.
it shows you crime doesn't pay unless you're Boba Fett.
I think that's the lesson here. I
Yeah.
think that's the lesson of the episode. Crime does not pay unless you're Boba Fett.
If you want to be a bounty hunter, you got to be Boba Fett. At the end of the day, he's the most well known. He was the first one that really did the job in Empire Strikes Back. In the franchise, he has to reign supreme. And now that there's more empathy and compassion for him. He's become an anti-hero. He's become like a Venom-like character. He's very much okay. He's got a heart, and he's not going to just shoot children in the head or kidnap them. I don't think he'd ever take that kidnapping job. Not the Boba Fett we know today. He
No.
he's just more. I'm just going to run this syndicate.
Yeah, like I'm gonna like he's in his like redemption era. Shout out Taylor Swift. And um he's in his redemption era. He wants to redeem himself. Like he got out of what is it, the Sarlacc pit? Whatever he got pulled
Yes.
into in the original trilogy. And he got out of that, made his way through the desert, found his beloved Tusken Raider family, another problematic group that I think even this was their redemption story, the Tusken Raiders.
Yeah, yeah. I was
This
thinking that
was
myself.
definitely their redemption story because they have not boded well in other storylines.
No, no.
Yeah, R.I.P. Shmi Skywalker, R.I.P.
Yeah,
Um,
me.
and yeah, no, and he just like you said before, was one of the bounty hunters who found the more that you can find in love. And that's something that Cad Bane never got.
And that speaks to the larger theme of Star Wars as well. Be about others, and it's really just very simple. It goes to like Hinduism or any religion really. It's just look out for others. Don't be so self-absorbed. And I think anyone in the galaxy, whatever your profession, if you're missing that love, if you're missing the sense of others and helping others, but take, you get your just desserts in the end, and that's Cad Bane is just another casualty in that story, that great cosmic battle, and it just, in a sense, he echoes Darth Vader's fate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It Star
there's
Wars
a
is
lot
great
to
at
it.
coming full circle. It's so warming.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really beautiful thing.
All right. I mean, this is why we do this. We nerd out on this stuff because I don't know, it just reflects back to life and all the influences that they bring in to tell these big stories. It's from the building blocks of our own reality. Um Tenfold.
Right. It helps us frame our visions of identity and the world and existence. And Star Wars is very good at, just digging deep, even on a surface level, on a subconscious level. There's a lot to it. And thank you for making this happen too. This whole wonderful podcast with mental health and Star Wars. It's just great to see you put some supply for the demand with the fandom, because people want to go deep. And I don't think there's ever been a Cad Bane podcast. So I can safely say we're probably the first here, and I really really appreciate just this opportunity.
Oh, well, thank you so much, James. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate your time and your wonderful expertise and all of your big nerd feelings. This
Yeah,
is what it's all about, baby.
I'm here. If we'll do Vader in the future, if that's on the radar, and I would love
Oh.
to be a part of this, because this is really really very fun. A and B, I think just important just to keep it going. This is what Star Wars is all about, right? We're part of one big galaxy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you heard it right, folks. You will see Mr. or hear Mr. Abadi again in the future when we have our Darth Vader trilogy arc, which, ooh, that's going to be a good one. That's going to be, it's going to be big and dark and sad and
Very pumped.
all the things that come with the continuation of the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. Mm.
The helmet's coming off for this. Yeah, it's going to be exciting.
It is coming off. Right, we are in that pod thingy, and the helmet is coming off.
Yep. This is good, and this gives an opportunity to talk a bit more Hayden Christensen too. It's great to see him back.
Oh my god, yes. Oh, the nerding out that will ensue will be epic, my friend. It will be epic.
Oh yeah, for
All
sure. So
right.
thank you.
Thank you for your time today, James, and we will see you very soon.
Yes. You have a great day. I appreciate it, and everyone, thank you for listening. And I hope that you got something out of this, and that you apply it maybe to your fandom, and just kind of pay it forward.
Cheers to that. All right, talk soon, James.
Talk soon. Take care.
Now let's shift gears and delve into our condition assessment with a special guest who's no stranger to the inner workings of the Star Wars universe. I had the privilege of speaking with Simone Rinne, a social worker and fellow mental health podcaster, to gain his unique professional insights on what Bane has going on deep down. Our journey down Bounty Hunter Lane continues right now. Hello, Simon. How are you today?
Kristine, really good. Thank you. Happy to be here and excited to go on this journey wherever we decide to go in the galaxy far, far away.
Yes, that is what I'm talking about. I am so excited to welcome Simon Rinne. He is a licensed social worker in Queensland, Australia, with 15 years of experience in the Australian public service. And in 2021, he started the Mindful Men podcast to share his story about his own journey with mental health and help normalize discussions, particularly around men's mental health. And I think that is just about the most noble thing anybody can do, Simon.
Thank you. There's a lot of mental in there, definitely as a lived experience therapist, but I love what I do as a men's therapist now. I'm no longer in the public service, but yeah, loving what I'm doing in the men's space and hoping that maybe even today's conversation can inspire a guy out there to pause and reflect and maybe reach out to a mental health practitioner if they're really struggling. So hopefully that's what we achieve today.
Hopefully. I have really enjoyed listening to a few episodes of your podcast. I find that the themes end up being so surprising, but so absolutely on point that I was like, "Oh, I didn't think about that specifically as an issue," but of course that's an issue. My favorite might be gray area drinking.
Yes.
I'm like, "Ooh." Like, I myself, I stopped well, I took a break from drinking about 6 months ago, and so that one I think, like, pointed out because at the time when it was a little bit, like, not planned to stop drinking, even just casually and socially, I was a little nervous about it, and
Mm.
I didn't know why. I was like, "Why am I so nervous about not drinking anymore?" Like, whether it's going out socially or being home and not having that glass of wine after work. And I think back now and I'm like, "What a strange feeling to have had." But
Well,
it's
it's
but
an
it's very
interesting.
poignant.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're probably going to talk about it today. I talk about it a lot. Is these social constructs of who we are as people, and alcohol consumption is one of these things that we're constructed in our societies. Particularly, if anyone's recognizing my accent, I am from Australia, so we have a big drinking culture here. And if you're not drinking, the question is, what's wrong with you?
Right,
And for me, it was 25 years of drinking to numb my pain, to socialize, to feel normal, in inverted commas, if that's something. And but turning 40 and becoming a dad and all that type of stuff made me reflect on these social constructs and recognize that, what, drinking doesn't serve me anymore. It didn't serve me. And so I've been sober since I was 40th and last August, so August 2023, and feeling great about it. And I'm wondering why I just didn't do it earlier. But as similar to you, like, I had all these thoughts and feelings as to being scared, almost being scared to not drink and to say that I'm sober. But I'm finding that it's actually a bit of a cool thing at the moment. It's a bit of a trend, and I'm jumping on that trend bandwagon,
right.
and really starting to reap the benefits of that too.
Right? You feel better. And
Hmm.
it's kind of nice at the end of the night, even if you are out socially with friends, to just be like, "Okay, now I'm gonna go home." And
Yeah.
you don't have to think about, "Okay, how much have I drank? Like, am I okay to drive? Should someone drive me home? Should I take a cab?" Like, it's just nice to be able to just go home and get a good
Yeah.
night's sleep and wake up feeling rested and hydrated and just all these little things. Um but I digress. I digress. Yes, you should all go listen to the Mindful Men podcast, and we will have a lovely plug again at the end. So you all remember to go listen to this fantastic show. But right now, we have to get into a certain bounty hunter and all of his toxic masculinity. Yes, we are continuing our discussion of Cad Bane, everybody's favorite bounty hunter in the galaxy, and we are going to get Simon's condition assessment on a few particular scenarios I sent him about Cad Bane, and kind of see what he might have going on under the surface, under that big hat.
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully, I do him justice. When you sent me through Cad Bane, I have to admit, for any Star Wars fanatics out there, like, I didn't know who Cad Bane was, but I do know what Star Wars is, so I've got something up my sleeve there. But yeah, I was really excited to see his, I guess, character assessment come through and start to unpack that from a mental health perspective. I guess it's not too dissimilar as someone walking into my clinic for the first time and me starting to unpack their trauma or their pain, or whatever it is. So yeah, really looking forward to diving in. But everyone go easy on me if I don't do him too much justice.
Oh, I'm sure you're gonna do great. And we love any Star Wars fans here to any extent. Even if you've only just heard of Star Wars, that's fine. But and who knows, maybe this will make you want to go watch some of the Clone Wars content and learn
Yeah,
more about Bane.
I reckon it might actually. It's prompting some ideas for me for my next viewing. I've finished my last lot of series that I was watching, so I'm looking for something new. So maybe this is it.
Ooh, I'm excited. One step closer to some Disney royalties if I get someone to watch Star Wars. Okay, are you ready to get into it, Simon?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So, scenario one. As Bane begins to excel in his work as a bounty hunter on his home planet of Duros, he understands the importance of image to one's reputation. He feels that if he wants others to respect him, he has to project an intimidating, somewhat terrifying persona. With a long duster, wide brim hat, and dual pistols ready at the hip, with his piercing red eyes, he presents what he feels is a dangerous man, one worthy of respect, which we as the viewer know he's this classic Western trope of the no nonsense, gunslinging bounty hunter made famous by villains of old Hollywood Westerns. At one time, the quintessential image of manliness. He feels this image will command the respect he feels he deserves for his skills and will aid in propelling his career forward, which it does. Bane is very professional and charismatic when it is beneficial to his profits, and his character frequently exudes an intelligent, focused, by any means necessary approach to his jobs, waving off most moral and ethical boundaries if the price is right. As his reputation as a skilled and ruthless bounty hunter grows, he eventually becomes known as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. So, what do you think, Simon? What do you have to unpack there?
Mm. It's, what comes through to me is this sense of identity. So, as a men's therapist, a lot of the work that I do is around who are we as men today in 2024, and who are we? Who were we 5 to 10 years ago? Who were we 20, 30, 40 years ago? However old the guy that I'm working with, and I think back to my own childhood, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s and noughties. That's the decades that I was a child, and all the influences about that I had around in terms of including Star Wars and what we watched on TV and movies and what happened in the schoolyard, what happened on the sports field, what happened in the family home. This was a time before social media and internet and all that type of stuff. So identity is one that comes up in this hyper masculinity notion of who Cad Bane is, or even is it hyper masculinity? Maybe it's alpha masculinity. Maybe it's toxic
Um,
masculinity.
I think they
Um,
all are very relevant. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. And so thinking back to as a mental health practitioner, I'll be like, okay, well, where does this persona come from? Why do you need to be this unwavering professional bounty hunter? What's tied up into this? What emotions, what feelings, what thoughts, what history is tied up into this persona? And so if we look to unpack him more broadly, and assuming he wants to go deep in his therapy session, it's where does it start? And looking back to his childhood, I understand that he's not from a wealthy area. Is that right?
Yes, he grew up in the slums
Mm,
of his planet. So very poor, very impoverished, and pretty much worked his way up. He saw bounty hunting as a way to basically make money and gain respect.
mm,
And as he became more skilled bounty hunter, got a lot of jobs on planet and then started getting jobs off planet, he realized like, okay, this is what I need to do, and in order for people to take me seriously, you have to put forth a certain kind of reputation.
yeah. And so the question is, why does he need respect? And so if you look at his upbringing, being in this poor slums like environment, what maybe we've got these different environments, and as a social worker, context is important. So
Mhm.
is he going to school? What's happening in the home? What's happening with his social circles? Has he got friends? Is all these types of things, how are they impacting who he is as he's developing into a boy and then a man? And then for someone who's looking for respect, that sheds light on maybe he's not receiving respect. Maybe he's in an abusive family, or he's getting bullied, or whatever, or maybe he just sees their social status in the family unit um, as something that is really degrading. And so to become a bounty hunter, which is probably the easiest route, I would say, when we're in a pain situation, we tend to find the easiest route to follow to try and get out of that pain. So maybe that's
Mhm.
prevalent where he grows up, and if you were to apply that in the same low socioeconomic areas of the world today, it's probably very similar. Like, what's your out of this pain?
Mhm.
Is it a life of crime? Is it a life of drugs? Is it prostitution? Is it, trafficking? Is it all these things that maybe society wants to hide away from, but it's your out. It's your way to build that respect. And so that comes into it a lot for me. And then it's this extending on that, this notion of what it means to be a boy and a man. And so if we were to take it from a society view, it's that notion of, for boys and for men, it's socially acceptable for them to be strong and to be tough and to, suck it up and bury their emotions down and pursue life or work or study or whatever they're doing at a rate of knots, which is essentially, I will do anything to succeed here. Because what it's doing is it's showing worth in the world. If we were to apply that same to girls when they're born, it's very different. We want them to be, or we don't necessarily want them, but it's socially acceptable for them to be nurturing and emotional and vulnerable and all the opposites of what it means to be a boy. And so very early on, if we look at the male psyche, it's this notion of, how can I prove myself to be a boy and a man and be worthy of this title? Because I don't want the opposite. If we show the opposite of those strong, masculine, testosterone-driven qualities, then we're often labelled. And I've had this myself, is showing any sort of vulnerability when I was younger, and I would be labelled as a girl or gay or sissy or wussy or all these types of things. And it's not something that is necessarily wrong to be feminine or to be gay or homosexual or whatever. It's just that as you're growing up, you don't want these labels. You just want people to see you for who you are. But we buy into the labels, and the labels are reinforced by everything around us. And so maybe bounty hunting was the out, and it was a label that Cad Bane could really draw from and go, you know what, this is strong. This is going to get me out of being in poverty. Maybe I can do some good in his own eyes, whatever good looks like, and he was going to run with that. And so this highlights, I guess, a lot of the stuff that guys that I see in my therapy clinic struggle with today. They're in their 40s, I'm in my 40s, and they're wondering about who they are. And they've bottled things up for so long, and coming in trying to find this sense of self-worth or sense of self-identity or peace of almost of being maybe not so masculine in a way that society, tells boys and men that they need to be. And so I've seen this in my own journey as well, trying to, for example, feeling lonely and wanting to join men's groups and trying to find one that kind of fits with my psyche and my vulnerabilities and my authenticity. But when I first started looking for these groups, all I would see is the hyper masculine, the alpha male ones, where guys would go into the jungle or the bush or wherever and beat their chests and have their shirts off and be screaming at each other, and there's all these things that I would label, and a lot of people would label, as toxic. It's reinforcing this toxic, barbaric alpha male version of ourselves that a lot of guys actually don't connect with. We are soft and we are nurturing, we are vulnerable, or we want to be. And so this is where a lot of guys do come into therapy. And I think some of Cad Bane's structure or psyche might be someone like that, and then we'll probably get to it in scenario 2 as well, is developing into this persona of someone who's just hyper masculine, toxic masculine almost to a degree as well. Even the images that we see, and you painted a great picture of him being this Western gunslinger, and I was doing a bit of Googling about him yesterday, and it's even what he wears. And so it's not just about what we're feeling on the inside, it's also about what we wear and what car we drive and where we live and all of our hobbies and all that type of stuff. That is, again, reinforcing this notion of masculinity or femininity as well. And I'm sure we can unpack a lot of that, but that's just my initial thoughts of him as this masculine or hyper masculine guy who maybe he's fallen into this kind of career because he was his way out, and it's what he knew, and it was what was reinforced in the slums where he grew up. It was maybe the go-to profession for someone in that kind of environment as well. there is another aspect that comes up, and I'll stop talking in a second, Kristine.
No, you. Oh, please, Simon. You. I'm just listening. I'm just enjoying
Yeah,
myself. Please
it's
feel
this
free.
was this notion of patriarchy, and it comes up often when we're talking about hypermasculinity and all that type of stuff. And we've touched on country western, and the heroes are leaders, but also villains are leaders in themselves. And in the patriarchal world, it's that men are leaders as well. And so him trying to lead and go up the ranks in bounty hunting, and is that even a word, bounty hunting?
It is now.
Bounty hunting, it is now. But him climbing the ranks and wanting to be the best bounty hunter in the world, it's this notion, it reinforces this stereotype of what patriarchy is, and there's a lot of negative press on it at the moment. There's good elements of it, but it's also, there's some toxic elements of it as well, of being the alpha male, being the go-to guy for whatever needs to happen. And a lot of that persona is reinforced by the strong hyper alpha male that a lot of us grew up with. And it'd be interesting to challenge that with other bounty hunters who maybe not be male, or as hyper masculine, maybe thinking outside the box in different bounty hunting. I've said it again, hunting. Different ways of doing that job as well. So that's what's coming up for me: social constructs of masculinity, patriarchy, and I hope the viewers are still listening, because it is all intertwined and can get very deep and dark, and but also interesting at the same time.
No, I couldn't agree more. And definitely that the toxic masculinity that really comes out in what I've been referring to as his competitive survivalist mentality. Like
Yes.
he equates being successful with being the best. And really that actually becomes quite an obsession of his character, that he gets so hyper focused on being the best that he actually really loses sight of the bigger picture.
Mm.
Because his whole, I mean, aside from working jobs and making money and really just like this kind of self-centered, I'm just gonna keep going out for me way of living, he gets really hyper focused on being like, all right, I need to take out everybody else so that I'm the best. And it's no question, and everybody knows. Like I'm the king.
Mm.
I'm the king. I wear the crown.
It brings up
And
a status piece as well. Like
yeah.
if I'm the best, then everyone's going to look up to me. But there's an element of, I guess, in the mental health space as well, is this hyperfixation or hyper focus as well. As someone who's a lived experience, so I live with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and for a long time, in order to manage the anxiety symptoms that are related with OCD, I would have to perform behaviors or whatever in a certain way, but they'd have to be in a way that felt just right. And so there's an element of, or a large element of, perfectionism here. And so you do these things, and you almost become a superhero at doing these things. When you live with a condition like this, you see elements of it in autism, ADHD, etc. A lot of the neurodivergent conditions. But you almost become a superhero at doing things in a way that feels perfect to you. And so this also comes out with Cad Bane for me, is wanting to be that best and will do anything to become the best at the expense of what else around you. And for some people that could be relationships, it can be, their sanity, it could
Mm.
be their well-being, it could be finances, all that type of stuff, a whole range of different things. And this hyperfixation is often an underlying thing of maybe a mental health condition that so many guys would actually ignore and think that this is just part of my masculinity. I'm going to be the best and do the best, but there's sometimes or often underlying conditions that reinforce the need to be perfect. And I think with COVID, for example, we had COVID the last few years, and burnout was one thing that came up a lot for a lot of different people, myself included. I experienced burnout too. And one of the common themes that I experienced with some of the people that I've spoken with as well is this notion that we can no longer be perfect anymore, that we need to let our guards down and let the world see us for who we truly are and who we really are. And perfectionism essentially causes a lot of that burnout as well. So interesting to see if he continues down this track, whether or not burnout will become a thing, whether or not he can sustain perfectionism, and for how long. And because you can do it for a long time, but there will come a point in time where everyone lets their guards down, and the world falls down, the world crumbles down, because it can no longer be that perfect being that we're trying to be, whether it's for ourselves, for somebody else, or for society at large.
Yeah, and the question comes if you can recognize that in time.
Mm.
If you can kind of take that step back and be like, "You know what? I think I have." I mean, really, with any issue that should probably be assessed with therapeutic intervention, is realizing that you have a problem, that how you're functioning isn't sustainable. And
Yeah.
know that, like, you're reaching, like, hopefully you realize that, like, the brick wall is approaching before you go slamming into it in X amount of ways. Um, and, I love that idea of we're kinda getting in this era where people, hopefully men and women, are realizing to let go of that sense of perfectionism, that need to do everything perfectly, to be the best, to work the hardest, to provide the most results. And I can definitely see how society puts that pressure on men, especially as another societal standard is the providers.
Mm.
And I can imagine that, especially for a lot of your clients, I can imagine letting go of that stereotype is very freeing.
Absolutely. You see it in the, parents, for example, and you say the provider, and we still have a very lopsided way of managing new births in families as well.
Mm.
So even though we're trying to I guess promote equality and so forth, the medical system
Oh my
is
gosh.
one of favoring one parent over the other, and in different contexts as well. So, for example, when a mother or the birthing parent gives birth to the child, there's this concept that I've come across is maternal gatekeeping, and there's a lot of support that's provided to bub and the birthing parent, usually the mother, and that's rightly so. Like that's justifiable. They've gone through a pretty traumatic thing. I mean, I was there for both my kids' birth, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Like, it was terrifying watching
Right,
that, and my wife go through that.
the lot of
But
women is extensive.
yeah, absolutely. And but on the flip side of that, being a dad and wanting, I was at every scan and every appointment and all that type of stuff. But a lot of guys and a lot of dads feel this like we're ignored in the process. There's a
Mm,
lot of like, "Oh, how's mum going? Is everything okay?" And again, as I said, it's rightly so. But as dads, we sit back and no one really asks, "Are you okay back there?" Dads can also experience postnatal depression as well
yeah.
from a father's perspective. So there's that element, and I can't remember where we're going with this, but it's a great discussion. I think it's the modern family as well. I
No, I'm
think, Christine, I've lost my train of thought.
no,
That's
it's
why we're going down that bad way.
No, I mean, that's the I know what? I love that. It means our conversation's going great.
Mm.
Um, no, I completely understand that, and I love that perspective, especially from a father's perspective of you're also about to go through this huge life change.
Mm.
Like, it may not have the same physical effect, like an outward appearance, obviously, as a pregnant woman. But they even say that some fathers have like phantom pains, that they start
Mm.
having some of the same symptoms, not so much labor, but like some of the same pains and some of the same like discomfort symptoms as their pregnant partners. And I always found that so fascinating, because then that's just our cosmic energy, like, operating on some sort of, like, cellular level, and I found that very interesting.
Yeah,
Um
absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, the guys that come in, they're seeking this awareness of who they are and this identity piece as well. But in a modern age, like, I think we're talking about providers. I'm back. So
Yeah.
we're talking about
Yes.
dads being provided, and so like when they're in the health system and they're disregarded often a lot,
Yeah.
and everything's focused on the mum and the bub, and it's again rightly so. Like, they feel left behind. And so they have to go and provide, and they have to go to work, and they have to be hard, work the long hours. Sometimes if the mum's not working, they've got to try and make up two incomes potentially, or three incomes.
Yeah.
They're working multiple jobs just to get food on the table, to keep a roof over their heads as well. And in a modern world where inflation is going through the roof, I'm not sure what it's like over there, but over here inflation is
Oof.
really high, and cost of living is just through
Yeah.
the roof. And we'll talk about drinking. Part of the reason I gave up drinking was because alcohol was becoming too expensive to buy. Which is, one of the many reasons of people giving up different habits. Cigarettes is, over the years, which is probably not a bad thing anyway, but even just food like groceries, like dads have to, or men feel like they have to provide, they have to be out there. And again, in the workplaces as well. And this happened to me there was a period where I wanted to be the stay-at-home parent,
Mm.
and it was kind of a weird concept. Not many dads stay home and the mum goes back to work, or the birthing partner goes back to work. But I was going to do that, but just trying to get leave from work to do that, to
Yeah.
sustain, even if I went to part-time and do a bit of part-time work, and all the opportunities would forgo me, because I was a part-time parent or a stay-at-home parent. We do give up a lot of this type of stuff, and a lot of dads, particularly in the new age, who want to be that stay-at-home dad, come across this.
Yeah.
And the reason I think it's so difficult is because the society sees dads or guys as the providers, and it's that patriarchal constructs come back into it and say, no, you need to go to work, and
Yeah.
you need to provide for the family, and then if you do anything other than that, then your value is questioned. Why are you staying home? Why aren't you working? What's going on? What's the issue with your partner? Is she the dominant one in your family? So then we start
Right.
coming into those gender norms in the family household as well. And so these are all things that guys think about and want to break free from, these shackles. But I think we still got a long way. And yeah, it's an interesting, I guess, dynamic where we are at the moment, trying to break free from these traditional social constructs, gender norms, etc., and move forward as well. And we're in an interesting period of our history, and I'm seeing it, like, even with the mental health space, the work that I do with my son who's 7, and wanting him to grow up in a different generation where it is totally okay to be truly authentic and vulnerable, and not be criticized for it as being, or even labeled as weak or feminine or anything like that. Just want him to be his true authentic self. And so a lot of guys are, challenged by this at the moment. And I can see some elements of this maybe with Cad Bane and what he does. How long will it be before the straw breaks his back, and he needs to take time out for himself? He can't be that perfectionist anymore, or that hyper masculine guy anymore. He needs to look after himself, because the alternative is death.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I will say I also applaud you for that emotional maturity and awareness that you're working to instill in your son. I think that
Hmm.
is I always think that's an absolutely brilliant approach to parenting, because it really emotional awareness starts when you're young. Because
Yeah.
your awareness starts when you're young. You have long-term memory, you're developing your mental prowess and learning how you learn and becoming your own person, and why shouldn't that come with mental awareness even at a young age? So I
Well,
think that's wonderful.
I'm passionate about it because my wife often says that we're a splitting image of each other. So I don't want him to end up
Right, and yeah,
going through what I did.
I can imagine, yeah, as your son, you're like, "I'm big, you're not gonna go down the road I went down, you're gonna
Yes.
be better, you're gonna have better." And actually an interesting question I'd like to ask you, being that you are from Australia, how is the culture of maternity leave and paternity leave,
Yeah.
from work? I guess depending on if you have certain work benefits in place.
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, we do have access to, like, the government subsidises roughly 3 months or so. That don't anybody quote me on that. It's been a while since we've had a kid, but
Mm.
where there is a primary caregiver who can stay at home and get access to maternity leave at
Mhm.
the minimum wage or something like that. So there is access to that. We were very fortunate when we had our children that we both worked in the public service, and both my wife and we'd been in the public service for a long time, so we had access to a lot of sick leave and annual leave. My wife, I think she used maybe her long service leave for one of our kids when they gave birth, so we could top it up, and she could have a majority of the year off with that
Mm-hmm.
period. It's
Nice.
interesting though, like majority of parents that take that leave are the mum or the
Yeah.
birth giving parent, depending on which industry you work in. So as a public servant, we used to get a lot better benefits. So I got access to about 4 weeks of leave when our two kids were born each.
Mm.
Whereas I know other industries and guys working, they might get a week or 2 weeks max.
Yeah.
And certainly for the guys that I know that are self-employed, they don't get any leave. And so it just depends on which kind of industry you're in, but it is heavily suited again to the mums. And so you see a lot of mums taking a lot of time out of their careers to give birth to their kids and have families. And we even had to try, and when we're thinking about having kids, like how far apart are they? Are they 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? How long can we sustain financial instability while we're going through, the birth period, but then also the child care years as well. Like our daughter's in kindergarten this year, so she's 4. So trying to get to that school age where they can then go to school and navigate that, because the cost of childcare in Australia are just through the roof. So often a lot of parents make the difficult decision of leaving their workforce entirely
Mm.
so that they can look after the children at home. Because if they went to work and put the child into daycare or childcare, they would be no better off. And so why would you go to work to have your child in childcare when you could just stay at home with your child and be there 24/7 and doing that? So there's that kind of conundrum at the moment as well, that again, it adds to the cost of living as well. You make these hard decisions to become a single income family. And again, putting added pressure on whoever is that single person going out and working, whether it's, in most cases, it's the father. There's a lot of pressure in that space. But if we could all live in Scandinavia, I think they've got some of the best parenting policies in the world. So I've got a bit of Viking in me as well, from Finland. So maybe if we have another child, maybe we'll move over there. But I doubt it. I think we're done with 2.
Right. I definitely understand. And I definitely understand the struggles of rising costs of living and inflation. I happen to live in New York City. So we are not spared any sense of inflation or any cost. Everything
Mm,
here is expensive, from the rent to the insurances to the food to transportation to so
everything.
I completely understand. I have a friend who just had a baby and is moving back down south, and he said that his daycare cost should probably go down by half.
Mm,
And I'm like,
wow.
not half. He's like, I'm
Wow.
so excited to pay less money to get my
Mm.
1-year-old watched. I'm very excited.
And that's really important because, like, thinking about a lot of guys, and this is my case for me as well. Like, a lot of us don't live where we grew up, and we don't have those. We were talking about a lot about social constructs. We don't have this traditional community around us that our parents and their parents had. So, like, I grew up in Adelaide, South Australia, so that's Central Australia down south. But now I live in Queensland. We had our kids in Queensland, which is on the east coast, up towards the top northeast of Australia. And so we don't have a tribe around us. We don't have community. We
Yeah.
don't have grandparents to rely on. We don't have our family friend that we've known for 20 years down the road to look after our children while we duck out to the shops or we go to work or anything like that. So we have to outsource everything. We have to outsource childcare, or we have to take days off of work, or there's a lot of guys in Australia that they work in mines, so they do fly in, fly out work. So they're away for
Yeah.
3-4 weeks at a time. Then they come home for a week and then they're back, off they go. So they're very disconnected from community. And so we live in this nomadic world at the moment. It's very easy for us to move interstate or across the world, whereas historically that was a very difficult and expensive thing to do. And so a lot of people stayed put, and so they had community around them. to support each other, to look after each other. But these days it's chasing greener pastures, it's chasing work, it's chasing money. And you've got someone like Cad Bane, who's a bounty hunter, is chasing money, is chasing the status, is looking for greener pastures, and does that through the different jobs that he does.
Yeah, no, and we do. I mean, definitely do these things at the sacrifice of community and of the familiar. And yes, you have the sense of adventure. Like if
Mm,
you're that kind of adventurous person and you want to go live in a new city and you want to go experience new things or fly off to a new galaxy,
yes.
then those things are exciting. But there definitely are cons. Absolutely, that you're not going to have your grandma who lives 5 minutes away, or your mom isn't going to come and stop by for a few hours and take the baby. Um, and yeah, so then you end up having to, do what you have to do. Like you said, outsource your needs.
Mm,
Um, and yes, I'm sure, and I have no doubt that if Bane cared about anybody except himself for 5 minutes. He probably, I mean, and maybe that's also another reason why he keeps moving. Why he keeps moving around is that he doesn't need to lay down those roots.
mm,
Me and my co-host James, we previously discussed, we wonder if there was an experience in either his childhood or in his younger years where he was very attached to somebody, whether it was a family member or maybe a romantic love interest that maybe they'll develop in his storyline later on, that maybe he was attached to somebody and maybe got hurt, that he
mm,
just got burned, that maybe they died or they left him and there's a sense of abandonment. I mean, there could be anything when you're kind of brainstorming about the possibilities of fictional character. But that would really explain the behavior, that essentially it's a trauma reaction. Like, I'm
mm,
out for myself, I'm focused on my money, I'm not staying anywhere long enough to care about anyone or for anyone to care about me. And it's that dissociation from relationships and attachment, which I'm sure you've seen in your professional work can come as a trauma reaction from getting hurt.
absolutely, absolutely. And it's when we experience that trauma, the trauma response as well. So for some guys, it's bottling it up to a point where they become volcanoes and get very angry. So the
Oh, yes.
masculinity comes out. But other guys just they end it. So we got.
Yeah,
I'm going to mention suicide here, but we've got like I think it's 80% of suicide deaths in Australia are men,
yeah.
because they struggle to talk about things, and that's their only way out. And so when we do this, when we become so self-absorbed and consumed in our own sense of self or being or identity, whether that's identity in the workplace, in our careers, or in sports, or whatever we do, it can have a really negative effect if we don't find a way to balance that healthily. I was reading through Bain's analysis that he sent through, and narcissism comes up for me as well as this sense of his own self-importance and wanting to be that very best person, to the point where he would do anything to manipulate others, or treat others in a way that would put him on the pedestal.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
it's a really challenging thing. But unless we're brought up with healthy attachments, we don't really see that. If we're brought up in unhealthy attachments, maybe it's someone who's abusive, like a parent who's abusive, or we've been bullied and all that type of stuff. We start to see that as the way of living and the way of the truth, and that's why I guess understanding these social constructs that we've talked about a bit today, understanding that you can start to unpack and go, well, this is not necessarily the whole truth. Was a truth at a point in time where I was learning how to be a boy or a man, etc., etc. And that's why we're in an interesting age that we're in, because a lot of guys are starting to challenge all that, trying to recreate a new truth, one that's more aligned with who they actually are.
exactly, and I really love that you brought up that need of nurturing those relationships and kind of understanding the importance of how they shape who we are from the time that we're young, really into our adulthood. I feel like we you
Hmm.
never stop learning how to have relationships in a way,
Yeah.
especially as we age and those relationships change, whether they're with our children or with our parents or with extended relatives and friends. And I think that actually is a fabulous transition to discuss scenario two as we look into a very long term relationship that Bane has with another very famous bounty hunter by the name of Boba Fett.
I do
Uh,
know Boba Fett, so that's good.
yes, yes, that's excellent, right? Right. If you at least watch the original trilogy, you know Boba Fett,
Yes.
and actually, and there's a fun fact for everyone in this particular scenario that I didn't actually know until I researched Cad Bane. So if you're ready to get into this next one, Simon, I will read out
Yeah.
scenario two.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Cad Bane has worked with many bounty hunters throughout his career, but the only one that surpassed him in skill was the bounty hunter Jango Fett, whom the Kaminoans would use as the biological template for the clone army. For a time, early in Bane's career, he was mentored by Jango Fett. It was always Bane's desire to defeat Jango and be known as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, a title he really only has after Jango dies. After Jango's death, Bane later has a professional relationship with his son, Boba Fett, who is also a renowned bounty hunter, even from a very young age. For a time, he mentors Boba, as Jango mentored him. But Bane is a rather solitary, self centered person by nature. He trains Boba Fett with the desire to make sure that he becomes so talented that if Bane kills him in a duel, then he will secure his status as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. They eventually duel, though the outcome isn't what Bane hopes for, as they are both stricken down in a tie where both shooters hit their opponent, leaving Bane with a permanent head scar and Boba with the famous dent in his helmet. This rivalry persists for over 40 years. So, if you did not know, Simon, that the famous dent in Boba Fett's Mandalorian Beskar helmet is from this shootout with Cad
Hmm.
Bane that didn't make it into any canon content. It's a bit of like like not quite expanded universe because it's still canon characters, but it was a storyline that was supposed to be like expanded out, like fleshed out more in the Clone Wars the animated series. But then when it stopped at season, like kind of have like the lost season 6 and the lost episodes, and then it came back in 2020 with season 7. It was a storyline that never made it to the screen. And so it's a pretty deep dive on some Star Wars nerd stuff for to learn that. I was like, "Oh my god, that's how he got the dent in his helmet." It's very satisfying, to say the least.
Well, it's
Um,
often it highlights the if we're talking about the mental health is what lies underneath. Where do these scars come from? And
right?
they're often not talked
Mm,
about and spoken about. It's something that we have to dive deeper or go on a bit of a tangent to discover where that scar came from or where that trauma come from or where that sense of self came from, that sense of identity. We've talked a lot about that today, is where does his sense of self come from? What was his childhood like? And there's a lot of people that laugh about when they go into therapy. It's like, I don't want to talk about my childhood, but we've got to go there because we can start to learn about why we are the way we are, and it starts from day one. Like, what was it like being born into this world, and then growing up, and the influences and the challenges and the triumphs. We need to understand it all to really understand maybe what's going on right now and how we can move past maybe resentment and anger and pain and move into more of a thriving mindset too.
oh, that's where I mean, my own experience in therapy, I'm a big advocate of the therapeutic process, and I felt like the real work started when you start getting into the childhood trauma of like you said, like figuring out why am I the way I am? And that's
Hmm.
where you find those answers. Um, but I think that it's one, I love that analogy about uncovering the scars the and the dent in the helmet. That was great. Um, but I think that it's really interesting with Bane, as we discussed before, that like that hypermasculinity and the toxic masculinity and how it translates into him needing to be the best, and he's
Hmm.
only successful if he's the best. to the point where he can essentially plot to kill a child over
Mm.
time. He has very few moral boundaries, which I'm sure is also a result of a rough childhood, like you discussed before. Whether you see your escape from a certain impoverished situation being a life of crime, whether you're selling drugs or engaging in prostitution or trafficking, kind of whatever the money making system is in your environment, toxic or not, um, that this is the kind of morality that he lives by. Like, oh, this is what's going to get me to the top. Like,
Mm.
doesn't like leave everybody else in the dust. No one else matters. Nothing else matters. Just myself. And I think that speaks to maybe the narcissism you brought up before.
Yeah, potentially. But also the word survival comes up as well. So when we're in an environment where we need to fight to survive, like he grew up in this pretty rough, kind of world, and survival, you would do anything. I mean, imagine us if we were fighting for our lives to survive. I would pretty much do anything if I needed to. Like if you were to think about what's happening in the world with war, for example, and it's interesting. There's a famous comedian here in Australia, Ando, who's got these amazing books about refugees and this story about this girl growing up with a pack of wolves, and it's during a time when their country went to war and their parents were taken away, and all the things that they've had to do to try and adapt to a different world. And I can only imagine what's happening in places like the Middle East at the moment, and what happened in Ukraine, and pretty much anywhere where there's war. I mean, we're very fortunate in Australia to not have conflict on our soil, and haven't had it for some time. And so this notion of what it means for Bane to survive would shape the way that he sees the world, and would shape the morals that he has. And so then we have I guess a discussion around what's your morals and what's my morals in comparison to his morals, and whose morals are more appropriate. And again, it comes back to those social constructs of what it means to what it means to be good in the world, I guess, and what it means to be bad. And so we create these constructs based on our own contexts and our own upbringing and our own backgrounds, and so forth. But a lot of it is also driven by the environment that we're in. And so if we were to take someone like Bane and put him into the middle of, a war zone, you say Ukraine, Russia, or what's happening in Gaza at the moment, would we look at his actions a bit differently if we just saw him and we were someone who was also trying to survive next to him? It'd be an interesting observation or conversation to have with someone in a different context as well.
Yeah. It's like when you put context in really into any situation, then I feel like it can sometimes alter even our own definitions of really the ends justify the means. Like if
Hmm.
we see somebody operating in a war zone and just trying to survive, and it's like, well, what's your alternative? Just to lay down and die? But of course, if it's in a peaceful situation, then you might view somebody's actions, scrupulous or not, in a different light, because
Hmm.
context is everything.
Absolutely. And one of the most common things that I say in therapy is a guy will say to me a bit of a story, or I'll ask him to tell me a bit of a story, and then he might say something, and I say, well, what does that mean to you? Like, if he might say that I'm feeling angry. So what
Mhm.
does anger look like for you? Because anger looks for me something that could be completely different. And so understanding people in their own words and in their own context, what different meanings are, and thoughts are and feelings are, can help us bridge the gap between what we think is moral and what somebody else thinks is moral as well. And it's really interesting in the mental health space, and I also work in the disability space, where ideas of what's right and wrong can be very different to what the broader society or broader community believes as well. And so unpacking all of that, understanding what new normals are, that was bandied around in COVID. But, in the mental health and disability space, it's like, what is your normal? What does normal look like? What does that word mean to you? And again, it comes down to things like morals or ethics or values, identities, all driven by who we are as people growing up and where we are today as well.
No, I definitely agree with that. That as we, I guess, make our decisions through our lives, that I don't know, it like you said, it depends on how you were raised and the morals that you were instilled with, depending on your environment, because everyone's
Mm.
environment is a little bit different. And I think something that Star Wars as a whole, but particularly what I see in the Bane versus Boba juxtaposition, which is exactly what they meant to set up, is that Bane is this very solitary, very self-centered character, that he's always on his own, doing things for himself, he doesn't have a community around him.
Mm.
We talked about community earlier. While Boba Fett, in contrast, it's very interesting as you move outside of the movies and you get to see the character development they do very well in the TV shows. That you actually see that you actually start to learn about Boba Fett and the relationships he did have throughout his life. So he had his very close formative relationship with his father, Jango Fett, and was so devastated by his death that he went on this crazy revenge rampage and eventually became this child bounty hunter, which is storyline I really hope you get into in the television shows. It's so funny. And then later on in the Book of Boba Fett, which is the live action Star Wars show that came out recently, that he has this special relationship with this tribe of Tusken Raiders. Then they take him in and they teach him their ways, and he becomes very emotionally attached, like a family to them. Um, and eventually they get killed by the Pike Syndicate, and then Bane rubs that in his face and that makes him mad. And semantics, all details. And it's this, and then when they have their final duel, um, that it's Boba Fett and him using the things that he learned from his community, from the people that raised him and loved him, and the ones he cared about, triumphing over Bane and his kind of selfish solitude. And it's always something that Star Wars has done really well, is that battle of good versus evil, right versus wrong. Whether it's They also do redemption arcs really well. That's also their thing.
Mm.
Whether it's the blue-eyed blonde-haired of Luke versus the dark, shiny black Darth Vader, or I don't know, it's just those very, like we talked about westerns earlier, the very western juxtaposition of light versus dark, good versus evil.
Mm. What's coming up for me is what is right and what is wrong. So it's very philosophical again, and in the therapy space, it's like, what's your right? Tell me what your right is, and then we can work at if it's from a society level, if it's right or if it's wrong. I mean, but Boba Fett and Cad Bane are both bounty hunters. So even though there's like this one shining light as you're portraying Boba at the end there, compared to Cad Bane, they're essentially doing the same work. And bounty hunting is, doesn't sound like a very nice type of profession.
There.
It's quite a confronting profession, I would say, and not. I mean, I think you guys have got a TV show about bounty hunters over in the US, but we don't really have bounty hunters here. I don't think. I'm the wrong side of the law, so I wouldn't know. But,
well, I think it depends from what I infer about bounty hunting. I think it depends how you go about it. Like, because bounty hunters are a real thing. That there's a criminal out there and the police are having trouble catching them, and it's like, hey, if there's a reward out, I'll go catch this criminal for you and bring him to you.
Mm.
I think bounty hunters, by like reality nature, aren't actually criminals. They're helping to catch criminals. But I think then you have the murky ethical line of someone like Bane, who's like, well, I'm going to take a job from anybody. So, yeah, sure, I'll go catch a criminal and like collect the reward money. But if you pay me enough, I'll go kidnap a politician. I'll kidnap
Yeah.
kids. I'll go sniper murder somebody. Pretty much, if you have the money and I have the skill, you have a deal. And I think that's where the line gets murky. And I mean, Boba Fett over the course of his career does plenty of unscrupulous things. And I think he's, as I mentioned back, he's one of those redemption arcs. Definitely one of those Star Wars redemption arcs where he eventually starts has big questions about his moral standings and then
Yeah.
chooses to come back to a more ethical point of view on things. Star Wars loves a redemption arc. They love to bring people from the dark side to the light. Is, as I said, that very clear juxtaposition they're always making.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they did that with Darth Vader as well. So,
Exactly.
and interesting, like when because I grew up on the original three, the original trilogy, and I remember seeing, the dark suit that Darth Vader would wear, and then when he died. Sorry if I just spoiled it for everybody.
If they
You
don't know,
know,
they should go watch it.
he's this like kind of ghost-like figure, so it's all white and light and breezy and all that. Like right at the end was like that ghost figure, and yeah, it's interesting how they portray that. But even with bounty hunting, I've said it again. Then, how many times can I say that in one episode? It's how do you use your skills in a way that is positive or negative? And I guess it's our responses to things as well, isn't it? It's we might have been dealt with a lifetime of hard cards, but it's our response to using those cards. Are we going to go down the narcissistic, do anything at all costs to make money, Cad Bane type pathway, or are we going to have our own redemption and recognize that, the life that I'm living, and we talked about alcohol before, the life that I'm living is no longer serving me, and I need to change and want to change. And knowing that change is possible is critical, particularly, I guess, in the mental health space. And for men, we've talked a lot about men today, is like the men's mental health space is knowing that you don't have to keep playing those hard cards that you've got. You can actually throw the cards away and redefine what it is to be you, whether that's a bounty hunter, or if it's someone who's just an average Joe, or it's an elite sportsman, or a politician, or whatever walk of life you're from. You can make positive changes and better yourself in a way that is healthy and not toxic, which often we see in the men's space, or at least the discourse around the men's space, because so many guys aren't toxic. They're actually pretty healthy. But the toxic ones are the ones that get all the press and paint the picture for the rest of us.
Exactly. It's like sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the only one that gets heard. And
Yes.
that isn't always to everyone's benefit.
No, not at all.
No, I think that is a extremely poignant observation, and definitely drives home, I guess, like really the message I think that we can learn from Bane's behavior is that you need to recognize that maybe what you're doing isn't working, and that you could get to the end of your story and kind of be stuck in your own ways, and that can really be your downfall if you don't realize sooner that you need to make a change.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I couldn't have said that any better myself.
Well, I appreciate that coming from a professional. um, no, this has been wonderful, Simon. I've really enjoyed your perspective on breaking down Bane to this level. I don't think anyone has really examined this character this deeply, and I really appreciate you joining me on this journey.
No, thanks for having me on. I hope I've done him justice, and sorry to anyone out there who's a massive Bane fan and I've absolutely butchered his analysis.
No,
Don't come at me.
no, you have done a wonderful job. I think your perspective was extremely insightful, and I really enjoyed this.
I really did enjoy it. Thanks so much. And thanks for everything you're doing, holding space for mental health discussions in this really creative and unique way. It's really cool. And thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And can you tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the Mindful Men podcast. So it's available pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Also, my website. So it's www.mindful-men.com.au. That talks a lot about my therapy here in Australia, but also it links to all my socials. So I'm all over the different socials. So come and see me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn. YouTube, wherever you get your socials, and yeah, let's have the chats. Keep going about these discussions around men's mental health. I'd love to have the comments there as well.
Marvelous. I can't wait. I can't wait to cover another male character and get your perspective. I'll be dropping you the next episode.
Sounds great.
Excellent. Enjoy the rest of your day, Simon. I'm sure we'll talk soon.
You too.
Did I lie, people? Did I lie? Did I not say that this would be joy and delight like you've never known? The laughs, the tears, the moments we'll always remember with the friends we'll never forget? Well, maybe I didn't say all that. Maybe I didn't. But gosh darn it, this was a good time. Bane might sometimes be seen as a bit of a one dimensional character, certainly not as much emotional development as some of the more major characters. But peeling back those layers and giving him some real thought was an immensely satisfying time for me. I hope it was as good for you as it was for me now. I want to thank James and Simon for their time today. Their levels of acute intellect are what made me very confident that they would make for amazing guests, and they did not disappoint one bit. And if you enjoyed the cheeky banter with James and I, don't forget that he'll be back for an impending Vader trilogy arc. We are locked in, furiously researching to bring you only the best, well read content, and we promise we won't let you down. And as Simon mentioned, you can find him at mindful-men.com.au. And make sure to check him out on the Mindful Men podcast, streaming on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. So, what did you think of Bane's core motivations? Do you think his relationship with Boba could have been any different? Share these thoughts or any of your big Star Wars thoughts with me at mindtheforcepodcast@gmail.com or ping me on the socials. And speaking of the socials, please don't forget to follow up on all socials and check us out on your favorite podcast streamers. If you like what you hear, drop us 5 stars. I'm saying I'm a new podcast, people, and every little bit helps. Now, on the next episode of Mind the Force, we have a special little surprise in store for the listeners, and that's all I'm going to say about it. So, there. Go on, get on out of here. I'm Kristine McPartlin, and that concludes this episode of Mind the Force. See you next time, and stay mindful.